Cage Sovereigns. Introduction: what happens when absolute supernatural power is handed to a mortal mind. This analytical article explores a hypothetical psychological cross-examination conducted from the perspective of the Justice League. Locked deep within the high-tech confines of the Watchhour, two of anime's most brilliant, dangerous, and polarizing global conquerors like Yagami Kira from Death Note and Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia Zero from Code Geass face off in a grueling, ideological battle. Observed through the meticulously objective and lore-accurate lenses of Batman and Superman, this feature deconstructs the stark duality of their methodologies. While both achieve planetary subjugation, their true character is revealed through their contrasting motivations, one a malignant narcissist operating out of solipsistic boredom, the other a hyper-empathic, tragic strategist who became a demon to shatter a tyrannical status quo. Dive into a meticulous psychological autopsy that maps the fine line between the irredeemable void of an absolute ego and the agonizing, sacrificial nobility of a true fallen king. Back computer audio log timestamp 0300 hours. Subject filed Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia. Aliases 0, the 99th Emperor of the Holy Britannian Empire, the Demon Emperor, LL. Threat classification: Omega level global. Primary capabilities: genius level intellect, master tactician, charismatic manipulation, and a localized neurological override command designated as Geass absolute obedience. Audio recording commences. I have spent the last 48 hours analyzing the data caches retrieved from the Ashford Academy servers, the remnants of the Damocles logs, and the classified intelligence networks of the United Federation of Nations. The subject in question, Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia, represents one of the most dangerous, brilliant, and morally complex anomalies I have ever profiled. To the world, he is a paradox. First a messianic revolutionary who shattered a global superpower, then a despotic tyrant who subjugated a planet, and finally a martyr who orchestrated his own assassination. But to understand Lelouch is to understand the terrifying arithmetic of a man who decided that to cure a poisoned world, he had to become the ultimate toxin. This is my tactical, psychological, and historical assessment of the boy who conquered the world, died for it, and then crawled back from the grave to protect it. Part I, the mind of a demon, psychological profile at his core. Lelouch is a traumatized child trapped in the body of a grandmaster playing three-dimensional chess with human lives. The assassination of his mother, Marion, and the subsequent crippling and blinding of his younger sister Nunnally served as a psychological crucible. His father, Emperor Charles I Britannia, cast him aside as a political pawn. This betrayal forged Lelouch's foundational drive, a desperate, unyielding need to create a gentle world for Nunnally. Lelouch's methodology is entirely Machiavellian, yet driven by deeply emotional imperatives. He operates on the principle that the ends justify the means, a philosophy I have spent my entire life fighting against. He is willing to stack bodies, friends, enemies, innocents, and soldiers alike if the final calculus results in a better world. The incident with Princess Euphemia the Masker at the Special Administrative Zone of Japan was an accident of his own hubris, the catastrophic mishire of his Geass. But rather than confess, Lelouch weaponized the tragedy, turning his beloved half-sister into the Masker Princess to fuel the Black Knight's rebellion. It was a tactical masterstroke, but a moral point of no return. He absorbed the sin, internalized the guilt, and used it as armor. He's theatrical. The cape, the mask of Zero, the dramatic gestures. He understands the psychology of terror and inspiration just as well as I do. He knows that men will not follow a mere mortal, but they will bleed for a symbol. I use the bat to strike fear into the cowardly and the corrupt. Lelouch used the mask of Zero to give hope to the oppressed and to focus the hatred of the world upon himself. Part Roman 2, the Zero Requiem, the ultimate sacrifice. I have reviewed the footage of the Zero Requiem meticulously. It is, without question, the most audacious psychological operation in human history. After overthrowing his father and claiming the Britannian throne, Lelouch intentionally transformed himself into the most hated man in existence. He ruled as a tyrant, enslaving the aristocracy, conquering the UFN and holding the world hostage with the Damocles and its FLEIJA warheads. He focused all the world's hatred, all its malice, and all its desire for vengeance directly onto his own shoulders. And then he arranged for his best friend, Suzaku Kyorugi, dressed in the mantle of Zero, to run him through with a sword in front of millions. I know what it means to be the villain in the eyes of the public so that the world can heal. I took the fall for Harvey Dent to preserve Gotham's soul. But the scale of Lelouch's requiem dwarfs my actions. He committed global atrocities, engineered a unified global defense pact out of sheer terror, and then martyred himself to break the cycle of hatred. I condemn his methods, the sheer loss of human life, the manipulation of free will, the hubris required to decide the fate of billions. It crosses every line I have drawn for myself. Yet from a purely objective, tactical standpoint, the Zero Requiem was flawlessly executed.
He recognized that humanity needed a singular, universal enemy to unite against, and he had the sheer willpower to become the monster and pay the price with his own life.
Part Roman 3, the anomaly of the resurrection timeline death, however, was not the end of his data trail. Cross-referencing alternative timeline anomalies, specifically the chronometric divergence, where Shirley Finette survives, reveals that the Zero Requiem was temporarily compromised by the kingdom of Zilkston. His resurrection by the immortal CC, who utilized a gateway in Zilkston to retrieve his soul from the collective unconscious C's world, completely shifted his threat profile.
When he awoke, his mind was shattered, a fragmented shell.
But upon confronting the crisis involving Nunnally's kidnapping, the intellect of the Demon Emperor rebooted.
His operations in Zilkston demonstrate his tactical evolution.
He was no longer the messianic revolutionary or the despotic emperor. He was a surgical, pragmatic operative operating from the shadows.
The antagonist of this conflict, Shamna, the priestess of Zilkston, possessed a geas that I find particularly terrifying: the ability to send her consciousness back in time 6 hours upon her death.
Shamna had effectively created a localized temporal loop, countering every tactical maneuver Lelouch executed.
My analysis of his response to this threat is what solidifies his status as a peerless tactician.
Unable to comprehend how his perfectly formulated ambushes were being instantly countered, Lelouch did not panic. He applied the scientific method to warfare.
He utilized different invasion routes, altered assault timings, and sacrificed pawns to isolate the variable. He deduced that Shamna was either reading minds, predicting the future, or resetting time. He eventually cornered her by manipulating the very nature of her power, putting her into a forced sleep with his geas rather than killing her, thus preventing a temporal reset trigger.
It was a breathtaking display of real-time battlefield adaptation against an enemy with the ultimate tactical advantage: foresight.
Furthermore, the conclusion of the Zilkston conflict marked a permanent shift in his psychology. By leaving his sister shedding the names Lelouch, Roman 6 Britannia, and Zero, and adopting the moniker LL.
To wander the world with CC hunting down rogue geas fragments, he stepped outside of humanity.
He became a guardian from the shadows, an immortal warden cleaning up the mess of the gods. In many ways, LL is his most dangerous iteration, stripped of political ambition, but retaining his lethal intellect and unyielding resolve.
Part Roman 4 Power Assessment. The geas Lelouch's physical capabilities are abysmal.
His stamina is remarkably low, his hand-to-hand combat skills are virtually non-existent, and he relies entirely on nightmare frames, such as the Shinkiro or subordinates, for physical engagements. His true weapon is his mind amplified by his geas. The power of absolute obedience is a neurological override that forces the victim to comply with any command, up to and including self-domination.
However, Lelouch's genius lies in how he maximizes its strict limitations. It requires direct eye contact.
Mirrors and refractive surfaces work, video feeds do not.
It can only be used on a person once. It has an effective range of roughly 270 meters.
Memory of the time on the geas is wiped.
He does not merely order people to die.
He orders them to live, to forget, or to record this video and play it back at this exact moment to create flawless alibis and illusions. He uses it not just as a weapon, but as a scalpel to rewrite the geopolitical landscape.
Part V Contingency Protocol Checkmate. If I were forced to engage Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia, direct confrontation would be secondary to neutralizing his geas and isolating him from his command structure.
Phase 1 Sensory Nullification.
My cow's lenses would be heavily polarized and equipped with a localized scramble filter to prevent direct eye contact, nullifying the geas.
I would deploy autonomous non-biological drones, Batman Incorporated tech or modified Batbots as my vanguard.
Geas cannot affect machines. Phase 2 Information Warfare. Lelouch's strategies rely on battlefield control and communication. I would unleash a localized EMP and deploy Wayne Enterprise's most aggressive counter-slicing algorithms to blind his nightmare frames and sever his communication with his Black Knights or Zilkston assets.
If he cannot see the board, he cannot move the
pieces. Phase 3 Psychological Pressure.
His primary weakness is his emotional attachment to Nunnally, CC, and Suzaku.
I would not harm them, it is not my way, but I would create an illusion that they are in jeopardy, forcing him to act impulsively. When Lelouch is emotional, he makes mistakes.
He abandons logic for desperation. Phase 4 Physical Apprehension. Once isolated, neutralizing him physically is trivial.
A standard stealth takedown, a grapple line, or a simple nerve strike would incapacitate him instantly.
Final verdict: Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia is a tragic figure.
He was a boy who took the weight of a broken, corrupt world upon his shoulders and chose to break it further so it could be remade.
I despise his body count.
I am disgusted by his manipulation of free will. Yet, as someone who operates in the dark to serve the light, I understand the unbearable gravity of his choices.
He won his war.
He bought his sister's peace with his own blood,
and as LL he continues an eternal solitary vigil to ensure that peace is never broken by the supernatural powers that started his nightmare.
He is an enemy I would fight with everything I have.
But he is also a man I cannot help but respect.
End log.
Hour 000. The board is set. The interrogation room nestled deep within the subterranean infrastructure of the Batcave was designed to break the unbreakable, an architectural manifestation of paranoia and absolute control. The walls were lined with 3 feet of high-density acoustic foam and reinforced by an interlaced NTH metal and lead Faraday lattice that swallowed all electromagnetic signals. The air was meticulously regulated at a crisp, uncomfortable 58 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent physiological relaxation.
At the exact geographic center of the room sat a single welded steel table. On the far side sat Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia.
He wore no shackles.
Batman knew better
than to rely on physical restraints against an anomaly whose primary weapon was ocular neurological hijacking.
Lelouch was dressed in the dark high-collared traveller's coat he had adopted under the moniker LL, an elegant, sweeping contrast to the brutalist, utilitarian concrete of his cell. His posture was perfectly composed, slender legs crossed, hands steepled beneath his chin, back perfectly straight. He looked less like a prisoner of war and more like a sovereign monarch patiently waiting for a diplomatic audience to commence.
From the absolute darkness of the reinforced doorway, the Dark Knight emerged. Batman did not walk, he seemed to materialize from the shadows themselves, a towering, kinetic silhouette of Kevlar carbon nanotube weave and hardened ceramic plating.
As he stepped into the single, unforgiving pool of halogen light, the stark white lenses of his cowl locked onto Lelouch.
The lenses were not merely polarized, they were coated in a proprietary micromesh and backed by a neurobaffle frequency reverse-engineered from Jervis Tech's mind control circuitry, a direct, multi-layered countermeasure to the absolute obedience command known as GEAS. Batman pulled out a steel chair and sat. The scrape of metal against concrete echoed like a gunshot in the sterile air. "You've gone to extraordinary lengths, Bruce Wayne." Lelouch spoke first. His voice was smooth, a baritone rich with aristocratic inflection and the absolute confidence of a man who had commanded nations. "Lead-line walls to prevent external surveillance from the United Federation of Nations. Retinal shields embedded in your cowl. And a localized hum I hear vibrating through the floorboards, a continuous, fluctuating electromagnetic pulse field. It is calibrated to disrupt the Sakuradite-based operating systems of any nightmare frame within a 10-mile radius, acting as a functional equivalent to Nina Einstein's Jefferson disturber should my allies attempt an extraction." Lelouch smiled, a raised thin, calculating curve of his lips. "Lloyd Esplund or Rakshasa Chola would be fascinated by your engineering. You play an excellent opening, detective." "This isn't a game of chess, Lelouch," Batman replied. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, synthesized and modulated to vibrate ominously in the small room. "I've decrypted the data from the Ashford Academy core servers. I've cross-referenced the UFM black box logs, the remnants of the Damocles flight data, and the GEAS Directorate ruins. The Black Rebellion, the massacre at the Special Administrative Zone of Japan, the usurpation of the Britannian throne. You bypassed the cognitive free will of millions, dismantled a global superpower, and murdered your way to a crown." "I conquered a rotting, stagnant world," Lelouch corrected, his tone chillingly casual, betraying no remorse. "And then I cleansed it. The Holy Britannian Empire under my father, Charles I Britannia, was a Darwinian nightmare built on the subjugation of the weak. My father sought to use the Sword of Akasha to trigger the Ragnarok connection, to kill God, destroy time, and lock humanity in a perpetual, stagnant present where nobody could ever lie, but nobody could ever move forward. I rejected that. Everything I did to break the cycle of history and ensure tomorrow would arrive. And it worked, by slaughtering millions, by turning human beings into biological drones."
"You didn't cure the disease, you just became the ultimate symptom." Batman leaned forward, the scalloped edges of his cape spilling over the steel table like spreading ink.
"You manipulated a grieving knight of rounds, Suzaku Kyorugi, into running you through with a sword just so the world would have a unified scapegoat.
You think that makes you a martyr?"
"I think it makes you a megalomaniac who couldn't live with the unbearable weight of his own sins."
Hour 0:20, the utility of sin, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet further.
Lelouch did not flinch at the psychological strike.
Instead, his amethyst eyes narrowed, catching the harsh overhead light, the faint sigil of the GEAS bird glowing dormant deep within his irises.
"A megalomaniac." Lelouch's voice dropped an octave, the theatrical charm burning away to reveal the cold, terrifying arithmetic of the Demon Emperor.
"I bore the hatred of the entire world. I took every drop of humanity's malice, every grudge, every blood feud, every geopolitical fractured bone, and I focused it onto my own chest.
I wielded the FLEIJ warheads not to destroy the world, but to hold it hostage until it realized the futility of war.
And then I let my best friend end my life.
I paid for my utopia in my own blood."
Lelouch leaned forward, mirroring Batman's imposing posture, the space between them crackling with intellectual hostility. Despite the vast physical disparity, the sheer gravity of Lelouch's presence dominated the room.
I spent my life, my soul, and my honor to buy a gentle world for the people I loved. What have you bought with your endless theatrical crusade, Batman? Batman remained entirely motionless, a statue of dark resolve.
Justice.
Lelouch let out a short, cynical laugh that held no humor.
Justice.
Do not insult my intelligence. I have analyzed you, Gotham.
It is a perpetual motion machine of human misery. You're no different than Suzaku before the Requiem, obsessed with changing a broken system from within, clinging to a hypocritical moral high ground, while the innocent bleed. Lelouch tapped a single, elegant finger against the steel table.
Clark.
You catch the lunatic in the clown makeup. You lock him in a revolving door medical facility.
He escapes.
He butchers a dozen innocents.
He paralyzes the police commissioner's daughter. He beats a young boy to death with a crowbar in a warehouse in Ethiopia.
Batman's jaw tightened behind the cowl, the microservos in his gauntlets whining faintly as his fists clenched.
Lelouch noticed the micro-expression immediately and smiled.
Yes, I know about Jason Todd, Lelouch whispered ruthlessly.
You catch the Joker again.
You lock him up again.
And the cycle repeats.
You refuse to take a life because of a fragile, deontological moral code born from the trauma of a scared little boy in an alleyway.
You aren't saving Gotham, Bruce. You are preserving its status quo.
My sins, as you call them, had a definitive end.
I stacked the bodies high, yes, but I stopped the bleeding.
You are a master tactician playing a child's game, too afraid to apply the tourniquet.
Killing the Joker wouldn't save Gotham, Batman growled, his voice vibrating with barely contained fury.
It would only prove that his chaotic worldview is correct.
It would prove that murder is a valid systemic solution to our societal failures.
I am familiar with men who think like you, Lelouch.
Ra's al Ghul believes he can cleanse the planet through mass extinction.
You believe you can cleanse it through mass hypnosis and terror.
Once you cross that line, you lose your humanity.
You started by juicing corrupt soldiers,
then ambitious politicians,
and civilians,
then your own family.
Princess Euphemia, Lelouch whispered.
The name slipped out like a physical wound. For a fraction of a second, the flawless, impenetrable mask of the demon emperor shattered, revealing a flash of agonizing, profound grief. It was an accident, a tragic, unforeseen mutation of my power when the G's became permanent.
You ordered your sister to massacre hundreds of thousands of innocent Japanese citizens in a special administrative zone, Batman stated relentlessly, weaponizing the data.
And rather than confessing, you capitalized on it. You let her die a monster in the eyes of the public so you could forge the Black Knights.
I did not have the luxury of weeping.
Lelouch slammed his palm flat against the table.
I weaponized my grief.
I carried the sin of Euphemia, the death of Shirley Fennett, the sacrifice of Rollo. I used their blood as the mortar to build a future where my sister Nunley could open her eyes and see peace.
You let your grief paralyze your absolute potential.
Hour 040, the mirror of masks, the silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the Bat computer's cooling servers beneath them.
We are not so different, Lelouch said softly, his breathing returning to a measured, aristocratic calm. He leaned back into his chair.
We are both creatures of theatre.
We both realized that to change the world we could not remain mere men.
Men are flawed. Men die. But a symbol is immortal.
I chose a bat to inspire fear in those who prey on the innocent, Batman countered.
I act as a deterrent. I'm a reflection of their own guilt. And I chose the mask of Zero to inspire hope in the oppressed and terror in the oppressors, Lelouch replied seamlessly. I gave the 11s a miracle, but eventually, I realized that a savior was insufficient to unite humanity. The world didn't need a hero anymore, it needed a devil. I became the Demon Emperor so that the United Federation of Nations would band together to destroy me. I adapted to the evolving parameters of the board.
But you were trapped by your symbol.
You used G's, Batman said, his voice a low, unyielding bedrock of moral absolute.
You bypassed the human mind.
You stripped away the one defining trait that separates us from machines, the freedom to choose.
You ordered men to slaughter their comrades.
You rewrote memories, erased loves, forced slaves to worship you.
That isn't tactical brilliance.
That is a fundamental violation of the human soul.
You played God, and what exactly
do you do? Lelouch challenged, his eyes blazing with cold, terrifying intellect, the aura of the Britannian prince filling the sterile room.
You use fear, you use intimidation, shattered femurs, and psychological torture.
You hang men from Gothic gargoyles in the dead of night, leveraging their primal terror to force them into submission.
You bypass their free will by breaking their psychological resilience.
You're a master of psychological G-spruce.
You simply lack the neurological efficiency of direct eye contact.
I give them a choice to surrender, Batman stated, unmoved. They choose their actions.
I provide the consequences.
G leaves no choice.
Because humanity
when left to its own unguided choices, chose the Holy Britannian Empire.
They chose the FLERJ warheads that annihilated the Tokyo settlement.
They chose to conquer, enslave, and eradicate the weak, Lelouch retorted.
I didn't steal their free will. I relieved them of the burden of it until they were mature enough to govern themselves without destroying the planet. Hour 059. Checkmate. The digital cryptographic clock on the steel wall silently rolled over to the 60th minute. Lelouch glanced at the red LED numbers, then back to the imposing shadow sitting across from him. He steepled his fingers once more.
Tell me something, detective.
A hypothetical scenario for a man of your strict parameters.
Lelouch leaned in, his voice dropping to a serpentine, hypnotic whisper. If I offered you the power of Geesh right now,
the power of absolute obedience. One command, unblockable, permanent, overriding all biological and psychological defenses. Lelouch's eyes seemed to pierce through the polarized lenses of the cowl.
You could walk into the maximum security Winnevaccum Asylum.
You could stand before the Joker to face the Riddler.
You could look your eternal nemesis in the eyes and issue one simple command. Become a sane, peaceful, law-abiding citizen.
You could cure Gotham City overnight without spilling a single drop of blood.
No more dead Robins.
No more paralyzed allies.
Just absolute perfect order. Lelouch tilted his head, a devil offering the ultimate bargain. Would you take it?
Batman sat perfectly motionless. The white lenses of his cowl remained fixed on Lelouch's pale face. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. The only sound was the faint rhythmic pulse of the EMP generator.
No, Batman said finally, his voice devoid of hesitation.
Why? Lelouch demanded, genuine, intense curiosity flickering in his gaze. He studied Batman not as an enemy, but as a sociological anomaly.
Because the Force piece is just another form of tyranny, Batman said.
Because the moment I decide I have the right to neurologically overwrite someone's mind, I am no longer protecting Gotham.
I am owning it.
I know my own darkness, Lelouch.
I know what I would do with that power. It would start with the Joker,
then the corrupt politicians, then the petty thieves,
and eventually I would rewrite anyone who disagreed with my vision of order. I won't play God,
even if it cost me everything. Lelouch stared at him for a long, quiet moment.
Slowly, the defensive tension in his shoulders released.
He gave a soft, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture of profound melancholy understanding. You possess a willpower that rivals my own, and perhaps even surpasses my father's, Lelouch said, his tone shifting from adversarial to one of quiet, genuine respect. You're an immovable object, Batman. In a world of fluid morality and shifting alliances, your rigidity is magnificent. But it is also your greatest tragedy. You will fight this war forever, and you will never definitively win.
Because you refuse to do what is structurally necessary to end it.
Batman stood up. As he rose, his cape billowed around him, absorbing the light, and casting the entire interrogation table into sudden darkness.
I don't fight to win a final war, Lelouch, Batman said, his voice echoing with absolute finality. I fight so that tomorrow one less person has to suffer.
I don't need to conquer the world to save it. Batman turned away, his heavy boots echoing against the concrete as he walked toward the reinforced steel door. We are at a philosophical impasse then, Lelouch called out to his back, remaining perfectly seated in the shadows.
You will never accept my methods, and I will never accept your endless, bleeding cycle.
Batman paused at the doorway, the heavy vault door unsealing with a pressurized hiss.
He glanced back over his armored shoulder, his white lenses glowing in the dim light.
You're alive, Lelouch, Batman stated grimly.
CC extracted you from C's world. The Zero Requiem is over. You are LL now.
If you stay in the shadows hunting down rogue Geesh fragments and keeping your mess out of my world, we won't have a problem. But if you try to play God with humanity again, I won't just counter your pawns.
I'll take the king.
Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia smiled a genuine, fiercely dangerous expression that finally reached his glowing amethyst eyes.
I look forward to the match, detective. The heavy steel vault door slammed shut, sealing the room and plunging it into absolute silence, leaving the immortal strategist alone in the dark with the echoes of the bat. The grandfather clock in the study of Wayne Manor ticked with a heavy, rhythmic cadence, marking time in a room where two beings who defied it sat across from one another.
Outside, a torrential Gotham downpour battered the reinforced glass of the manor's Gothic windows.
Inside, the mahogany-panelled library was warm, bathed in the amber glow of a crackling fireplace.
It was neutral ground, graciously provided and undoubtedly monitored by their mutual acquaintance Bruce Wayne.
On one side of the antique oak table sat Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia.
He wore the immaculate, high-collared black coat of his current wandering persona, LL. His posture was that of a monarch holding court, legs crossed, back perfectly straight, his pale hands resting gracefully on the armrests of his leather wingback chair. His amethyst eyes were calm, calculating, and ancient in a way his youthful face belied. On the other side sat Kal-El of Krypton, Clark Kent. He was out of costume, wearing a simple, well-fitted blue flannel shirt, and dark slacks, his glasses folded and resting on the table between them. He did not sit with the rigid readiness of a soldier or the calculated poise of a king. He sat like a man resting on his front porch in Smallville. Yet beneath that relaxed exterior was the coiled, suppressed power of a dying star. Clark poured tea from a silver pot into 2 porcelain cups. He pushed one across the table. "I appreciate you meeting me," Clark said, his voice a rich Midwestern baritone that resonated with innate warmth and absolute sincerity.
"Bruce mentioned you were an anomaly.
Someone who managed to achieve world peace, but at a cost he couldn't reconcile." Lelouch did not touch the tea. He studied the man across from him.
He knew exactly what Superman was.
The solar-powered alien god. A being who could shatter the tectonic plates of the earth with a misplaced strike, who could outtrace the speed of light, and who chose, inexplicably, to spend his days fetching cats from trees and stopping petty bank robberies. "I did not come here for Bruce Wayne's reconciliation, nor yours, Kal-El," Lelouch replied, his aristocratic Britannian accent slicing through the warmth of the room. "I came because I was curious. You're the ultimate variable on the board. A piece that can move in any direction, any number of spaces, and yet you artificially restrict yourself to the movements of a pawn."
"I find your psychology profoundly irrational."
Clark took a slow sip of his tea.
His super hearing was already mapping Lelouch. The boy's heartbeat was steady, far too steady. It lacked the micro-fluctuations of normal human stress. It was the biological rhythm of a true immortal, sustained by the code of CCA, remnant of his raid on the collective unconsciousness of humanity. "I restrict myself because I have to," Clark said gently. "Because the moment I stop being a pawn, as you call it, and decide to be the player moving the pieces, I stop being a protector and I become a dictator. A semantic trap designed to alleviate your guilt for the lives you failed to save," Lelouch countered instantly, leaning forward. The firelight caught the dormant G-sigil buried deep within his eyes.
"I have studied your history, Kal-El."
"You possess X-ray vision and super hearing. You can hear the screams of innocents in war zones across the globe. You can hear the final breaths of victims of systemic poverty, human trafficking, and despotic regimes. You have the power to dismantle every oppressive government on this planet before the tea in this cup goes cold. Yet you do not. You wait for a supervillain to attack Metropolis, you defeat them, and you return to the daily planet while millions suffer in silence.
You allow systemic evil to persist out of the misplaced reverence for human autonomy."
Lelouch steepled his fingers. "You are not a protector. You are a glorified fireman who refuses to extinguish the arsonist." The weight of the crown Clark's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in a profound, sorrowful recognition. He had heard these arguments before, from Lex Luthor, from Manchester Black, from alternate versions of himself whose grief had driven them to incinerate their worlds in the name of safety. "I hear every heartbeat on this planet," Clark said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register that carried the weight of the world. "When I close my eyes, I hear the tectonic plates grinding. I hear the wind shearing over the Himalayas. And yes, Lelouch, I hear the wars. I hear the cruelty. Every single second of every single day, I have to make the conscious choice not to fly down there and force them to stop. Do you know how hard that is? Do you know the sheer, agonizing restraint it takes not to disarm every military on Earth?"
"Then why don't you?"
Lelouch demanded, his voice a sharp blade of pure, pragmatic logic. "If you possess the capacity to end suffering and choose not to, you're complicit in it."
"My father, Charles I. Britannia, sought to eliminate suffering by destroying time itself with the sword of Akasha, locking humanity in a stagnant present."
"I killed him for it because humanity must march forward, but to march forward, the cancer must be excised. I took the throne. I shattered the corrupt aristocracy, I centralized the world's hatred, and I ended the wars.
"I did what you were too cowardly to do." "And how did you do it?"
Clark asked, his blue eyes locking onto Lelouch's amethyst gaze.
The sheer moral pressure radiating from Superman was staggering, even to the Demon Emperor. "You used Jeez. You stripped away the one thing that gives life meaning, the freedom to choose. I took their freedom so they wouldn't lose their lives," Lelouch snapped back.
"You took their souls," Clark corrected gently.
"I know about the Zero Requiem."
Bruce shared the files.
"You conquered the world through absolute terror.
You used the FLEHJA warheads to hold millions hostage.
You enslaved the minds of soldiers, politicians, and your own family. You forced men to slaughter each other. And then you orchestrated your own assassination, so the world would unite in its relief over your death." Clark leaned forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow. "It was a brilliant tactical maneuver. A masterpiece of Machiavellian engineering.
But it was built on a foundation of lies and mass murder.
You forced humanity into a corner, terrified them, and then gave them exactly one way out. That isn't peace, Lelouch.
That's trauma bonding on a planetary scale."
Lelouch did not flinch. He absorbed the moral judgment of the Man of Steel without breaking eye contact. "Peace is not a natural state, Kal-El.
"It is an artificial construct that must be violently maintained," Lelouch said, his voice cold and absolute. Humanity is inherently fractured.
Left to their own devices, they will divide themselves by race, nation, ideology, and class. They will invent new reasons to kill one another.
The Britannian Empire was merely the most efficient manifestation of human nature.
I didn't introduce tyranny to the world, I merely perfected it, weaponized it against itself, and then destroyed it. The Zero Requiem worked. The United Federation of Nations stood unified.
The cycle of hatred was broken.
For how long?
Clark challenged.
A decade, a century.
You died, Lelouch.
And then what?
You resurrected. You roam the earth with CC, and you watch as the world slowly begins to fray again.
Because peace that is forged in the fires of absolute terror doesn't last. The moment the memory of the Demon Emperor fades, someone else will step up to fill the vacuum. Because you didn't teach them how to be better.
You just taught them how to be afraid of you.
The phantom zone of the mind. The grandfather clock chimed the half hour. The rain lashed violently against the glass, mimicking an escalating ideological storm within the room. You speak of teaching, Lelouch scoffed, picking up his teacup and swirling the amber liquid.
You believe in the fundamental goodness of the human spirit. It is an endearing, agrarian philosophy, likely instilled in you by your adoptive parents in Kansas.
But it is fundamentally naive.
How many times have you spared a villain, say, the Joker, or Brainiac, or Lex Luthor, only for them to break out and kill thousands more?
Your restraint is paid for in the blood of the innocent.
My restraint, Clark said, his voice vibrating with suppressed emotion, is what keeps me from becoming Darkseid. It keeps me from becoming you.
Clark stood up, walking slowly toward the roaring fireplace. The flames reflected in his glasses.
You think I haven't considered it?
Clark asked quietly. There was a time when I thought about it. When Lois was hurt. When cities fell.
I could incinerate Luthor from orbit.
I could lobotomize every criminal on Earth with my heat vision.
I could build a fortress around the planet and dictate the laws. I could be a god.
He turned back to Lelouch, his eyes burning with an intense, unyielding light.
But if I dictate the laws through force, then the laws have no value.
If humanity doesn't choose to be good, if they aren't allowed to stumble, to fail, to learn, and to pick themselves back up, then they are just pets in a terrarium.
And I am their warden. I don't want to rule humanity. I want to walk alongside them. I want to catch them when they fall, but I have to let them walk on their own.
Lelouch set his teacup down.
Clinked.
And when they choose to walk off a cliff?
Lelouch asked.
When they build nuclear arsenals? When they engineer Sakuradite bombs that wipe out the Tokyo settlement? What good is your inspiration then, Kal-El? You stand over the ashes of millions and console yourself with the thought that at least they had their free will.
I chose to bear the sin of their salvation.
You choose to preserve your own moral purity. You think I'm pure.
Clark let out a hollow laugh.
I carry the weight of every person I couldn't save. I remember every face.
Every scream.
But I also remember the triumphs.
I see the capacity for incredible boundless compassion in humanity.
You look at the world and see a chessboard, Lelouch.
You see pawns that need to be sacrificed to protect the king.
I look at the world and I don't see pieces.
I see people.
Clark walked back to the table and leaned on it, bringing his face closer to Lelouch's. Tell me about Princess Euphemia, Clark said softly. The air in the room instantly froze. For the first time since he entered Wayne Manor, the immortal tactician physically reacted.
A micro-tremor passed through Lelouch's hands.
His eyes widened a fraction of a millimeter.
The mask of the Demon Emperor slipped, revealing the shattered, grieving boy beneath. Do not speak her name, Lelouch whispered, his voice laced with a lethal, terrifying edge. She was your sister, Clark continued, his super hearing picking up the sudden violent spike in Lelouch's heart rate. She wanted peace.
She established the special administrative zone of Japan to end the bloodshed.
She wanted exactly what you wanted, but she was going to achieve it through compassion.
And your G's malfunctioned. You accidentally ordered her to massacre her own citizens. And rather than admit your mistake, you shot her.
You painted her as the massacre princess and used her death to fuel your revolution.
It was a structural necessity, Lelouch ground out, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the armrests of his chair.
The G's mutated. I could not reverse it. If I had confessed, her death would have been meaningless. The Black Knights would have dissolved. The rebellion would have died. I gave her tragedy utility. I made her death mean something. You justified a nightmare to yourself, because the alternative was facing your own guilt, Clark said, his voice, devoid of judgment, filled only with a deep, crushing empathy. You took a tragedy and turned it into an atrocity because you couldn't handle the fact that you lost control. That is what happens when a man tries to play God, Lelouch.
The moment you decide ends justify the means, you start finding reasons to justify any end.
You say you took the sins of the world upon yourself. But the truth is you just couldn't bear to live in a world where you weren't the one holding the reins.
The philosophy of the immortal and the alien. Lelouch closed his eyes.
He took a long, slow breath, forcibly burying the ghost of Euphemia back into the deepest recesses of his mind.
When he opened his eyes again, the cold, calculating emperor had returned. You speak of control, Lelouch said smoothly, recovering his composure.
You say I play God, but look at yourself, Kal-El.
You wear the symbol of the House of L on your chest, a symbol of hope. But to the people of Earth, you're a deity. You hover above them in the sky, invincible, immortal, watching their every move. You pretend to be a simple reporter from Kansas, but it is just a mask. You're an alien playing that being human, terrified of your own omnipotence. I'm human, Clark stated firmly. My biology is Kryptonian, but my soul, my upbringing, my values, they were forged in Smallville. I'm Clark Kent. A comforting delusion, Lelouch dismissed with a wave of his hand.
Let us test this humanity of yours.
What happens when your attachments are severed? What happens when Lex Luthor finally succeeds in murdering Lois Lane, or your adoptive mother? What happens when the city of Metropolis is vaporized by a nuclear warhead while you're off fighting in another galaxy? Lelouch leaned in, his eyes glowing with an intense, interrogative fire. I know the multiverse theories, Kal-El. I know of the timelines where the Joker tricks you into killing your own pregnant wife, where Metropolis is annihilated.
In those timelines, you do exactly what I did.
You snap, you conquer the Earth. You establish a regime. You use your power to enforce absolute peace. Deep down, you know my methodology is correct. You're just waiting for the trauma that will finally strip away your naive restraint. Clark did not flinch. He sat back in his chair, unbothered by the accusation. I know those timelines exist, Clark said softly. I've seen them. I fought them. The regime. The Justice Lords.
Every version of me that loses faith in humanity and decides to rule with an iron fist.
But you're wrong about one thing, Lelouch.
Clark looked up, his blue eyes clear and unwavering.
They didn't break because they lost Lois or Metropolis. They broke because they lost their faith. Grief is a terrible, consuming thing. If I lost Lois, Clark's voice caught for a fraction of a second, a mere thought bringing a shadow of pain to his face. It would shatter me. I would mourn her until the day I died. But I wouldn't burn the world down to avenge her. Because Lois wouldn't want that.
My parents didn't raise me to be a conqueror.
They raised me to help. Clark pointed a finger at Lelouch. You let your trauma define your worldview. You let the murder of your mother and the blinding of your sister convince you that the world was fundamentally evil and needed to be broken and remade. You projected your own pain onto the entire planet. My pain achieved global unification, Lelouch countered. Your faith merely perpetuates a tolerable level of global suffering. My faith allows humanity to grow, Clark corrected. You achieved unification through the Zero Requiem.
But look at what you had to become. You had to become a monster. You had to abandon your humanity.
You had to die, and even now, as an immortal, you wander the fringes of the world, unable to live in the utopia you created. You built a house for your sister, but you can never step inside it. Lelouch's eyes widened slightly. The blow landed perfectly, bypassing the tactical shields of the Demon Emperor and striking the vulnerable heart of the older brother. I never intended to step inside, Lelouch whispered, his voice carrying the tragic weight of his eternal exile. The world of tomorrow was for Nunnally, for Suzaku, for the Black Knights. It was not for me. My hands were stained with too much blood to ever hold the fragile peace I created. That is the price of the throne. A price you refused to pay. The irreconcilable paradigms. The rain began to slow outside, the violent storm tapering off into a quiet, persistent drizzle. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers, casting long shifting shadows across the library. For a long time, neither man spoke. The philosophical chasm between them was absolute, an unbridgeable gulf between the ultimate consequentialist and the ultimate deontologist.
We will never agree, Lelouch finally said, breaking the silence.
He adjusted the cuffs of his coat. You view power as a trust that must be wielded with infinite restraint, lest it corrupt the wielder and the subject alike.
I view power as a tool of absolute utility, a necessary evil required to shatter the chains of history.
You're right, Clark agreed, his tone sorrowful but resolute.
We won't agree.
I look at you, Lelouch, and I see one of the most brilliant minds I have ever encountered.
Your strategic genius is unparalleled.
If you had applied that intellect to inspire the world, to build systems of justice and equity rather than engineering a global hostage crisis, you could have achieved a peace that would outlast the memory of Zero. You could have been a true hero.
Lelouch stood up.
He looked down at the man of steel, his expression a complex tapestry of aristocratic pride, profound melancholy, and grudging respect.
Heroes, Lelouch said softly, are for children.
They are shining ideals that give people comfort in the dark.
But when the world is actually tearing itself apart, when the system is fundamentally poisoned to its roots, ideals are not enough.
Sometimes the world doesn't need a hero in a red cape to catch them when they fall.
Sometimes it needs a demon to tear the foundations down so they are forced to rebuild.
Lelouch stepped away from the table, turning his back to Clark.
Keep your restraint, Kal-El.
Be the symbol of hope this world so desperately craves.
Catch the falling planes.
Stop the petty thieves.
Let humanity stumble and fall in their precious pursuit of free will.
I will remain in the shadows, cleaning up the cheese fragments and the remnants of the supernatural that threaten to unbalance the board.
We operate in different spheres. Let us hope they never intersect. Clark stood up as well, his imposing figure towering in the dim light.
They intersect the moment you decide to take someone's free will again, Clark warned, his voice echoing with the authority of the Justice League.
The Zero Requiem is over. You're LL now.
But if you ever try to play the Demon Emperor on this earth, if you ever try to subjugate the minds of this planet, I won't just stop your pawns. I will stop you.
Lelouch paused at the heavy oak doors of the library.
He did not look back.
A faint knowing smile touched his lips. I am aware, Lelouch replied, his voice floating back over his shoulder.
And if the day ever comes when your faith shatters, Carl, if you ever decide to cross the line and impose your will upon the earth, do not think your invulnerability will protect you.
I have slain gods before.
I would not hesitate to slay a Kryptonian. The heavy wooden doors opened, and Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia slipped out into the cavernous shadowed halls of Wayne Manor, disappearing like a ghost into the architecture. Clark Kent stood alone in the library, listening to the Immortal's heartbeat fade into the distance. He looked down at the untouched cup of tea on the table, a stark reminder of a mind that could not be reasoned with, only opposed. With a soft sigh, Kal-El turned his gaze toward the window. The clouds were finally beginning to break over Gotham City, revealing the faint, distant light of the stars. He adjusted his glasses, walked out of the room, and prepared to go back to work.
There were people out there who needed help, and who needed to know that power did not always have to come at the cost of their souls.
Back computer audio log, timestamp 0200 hours.
Subject file Light Yagami.
Aliases Kira, the second L, the god of the new world.
Threat classification, Omega level global.
Primary capabilities, possession of a supernatural artifact capable of untraceable, remote, instantaneous assassination.
Genius level intellect, master manipulator.
Weaknesses,
severe narcissistic personality disorder, hubris,
emotional fragility,
dependency on specific parameters for assassination.
Audio recording commences. Computer, initiate a new case file under contingency protocol, false idle.
Over the past 72 hours, I have been analyzing a series of global anomalies, a synchronized, unprecedented wave of fatalities among high-profile, incarcerated, and newly identified criminals across the globe. The initial reports suggested a highly coordinated biological attack or a new, untraceable nerve agent. The cause of death in 95% of the cases was acute myocardial infarction, sudden cardiac arrest, but the geographical spread and the impossibility of physical access to these targets immediately ruled out conventional biological warfare.
This is not a pathogen.
This is a targeted assassination campaign on a planetary scale. The public has already given the perpetrator a name, Kira. I have spent my life hunting killers in the dark. I have faced men who use fear, men who use venom, and men who use the supernatural to bend the world to their twisted whims. But Kira represents an escalation that threatens the very foundation of human free will and the justice system. The world is terrified. They believe a god has descended to judge them. But I know better. Gods do not hide in the shadows, executing muggers and traffic offenders from afar.
Gods do not throw temper tantrums when challenged on live television. Kira is not a god.
He is a prolific serial killer with a god complex, wielding a weapon he barely understands. And after meticulously cross-referencing the Interpol database, the Japanese task force files, and the tragic timeline of the Kira investigation, I have identified the man behind the myth. His name is Light Yagami. This is my psychological, tactical, and moral assessment of the boy who decided to play God, and how I would tear him down from his self-appointed heaven. Part I, the anatomy of a god complex. To defeat an enemy, you must first understand their mind. Light Yagami's psychological profile is frankly pathetic. Most of the vigilantes and rogues I encounter are born from trauma. My own crusade began in an alleyway, steeped in blood and grief.
Jason Todd, the Red Hood, kills because he was brutally murdered, resurrected, and abandoned by the system.
Ra's al Ghul seeks mass culling because centuries of watching humanity ravage the planet have hardened his heart. Their methodologies are twisted, but they stem from a place of profound pain and a desire to prevent the pain from repeating.
Light Yagami has no such excuse.
He is the son of Soichiro Yagami, the chief of the NPA.
He grew up in a stable, loving, upper-middle-class household. He possessed a genius-level IQ, striking physical attractiveness, and a flawless academic record.
He was destined to become the top police superintendent in Japan.
He had everything, and yet he was bored. That is the terrifying catalyst of Kira.
Not trauma.
Not a desperate need for survival. Boredom. Light looked at the world from his pedestal of absolute privilege and decided it was rotten. When the weapon, the Death Note, fell into his hands, he did not use it out of a desperate need to save a loved one. He used it because he believed his intellect elevated him above the laws of morality. He suffers from malignant narcissistic personality disorder. He cannot fathom a world where he is not the smartest, most important entity in existence. When he first used the notebook and realized he had taken human lives, his psyche fractured.
A normal person would feel horror.
A normal person would destroy the book. But Light's ego could not accept that he, the perfect student, had committed a senseless double murder. To protect his own fragile self-image, he had to rationalize the act. He had to convince himself that those murders were righteous, and therefore he must continue killing to prove it wasn't a mistake. His entire crusade as Kira is not about justice. It is a desperate, bloody coping mechanism to avoid facing the reality that he is just a murderer. He wraps his atrocities in the cloak of cleansing the world because the alternative, admitting he is a monster, would shatter his mind. Part Roman 2, The Fatal Flaw, The Lindau. Taylor broadcast if there was ever any doubt about Kira's true nature, it was obliterated during the Lindau. Taylor broadcast. This was the moment Kira lost the war, even if it took years for his enemies to finally corner him. The detective known as L orchestrated a brilliant, if ethically compromised, trap. He broadcast a condemned criminal, Lindau, Taylor, on television, claiming to be the lead investigator, and openly challenged Kira, calling him evil. If Light Yagami truly believed he was a divine entity, dispensing absolute justice, he would have ignored the provocation. A true god does not care about the insults of mortals. A true agent of justice would recognize that killing the lead detective investigating him does nothing to lower the crime rate, it only protects his own identity. But Light couldn't help himself. His ego was bruised. Someone dared to call him evil on public television. In a fit of juvenile rage, Light executed Taylor on the spot. In that single, arrogant moment, Light revealed everything. He revealed that he was not an omnipresent force, but a human located in the Kanto region of Japan. He revealed that he could kill instantaneously without physical contact. But most importantly, he revealed the strict, absolute parameters of his weapon.
I have spent decades studying crime scenes.
Every weapon has rules. A sniper rifle requires line of sight and wind calculation. A bomb requires a detonator. What does Kira's weapon require? When L revealed that the broadcast was localized to Kanto, Light realized he had been tricked.
But from my perspective in the Batcave, analyzing the footage, I saw something even more vital.
Light killed Lindau, Taylor only after Taylor's name and face were broadcast on the screen. Kira requires two coordinates to fire his supernatural missile, an aim and a face. He is not an omnipotent deity. He is a coward hiding behind the supernatural spreadsheet. If you hide your face, he is powerless. If you obscure your name, he is blind. It is a terrifying weapon, yes, but it is deeply limited. And a limited weapon can be countered. Part Roman 3, The Descent into Villainy. Misora and Penba some within the public debate whether Kira is a necessary evil, a harsh but effective deterrent against violent crime.
They point to the 70% drop in global crime rates.
But statistics do not measure the rotting of the human soul.
Any illusion that Light Yagami was a vigilante seeking justice evaporated where he targeted the FBI agents deployed to Japan, specifically Ray Penba and, consequently, his fiancée, Naomi Misora.
Ray Penba was a law enforcement officer. He had committed no crime. He was merely doing his job, investigating suspects. Light murdered him and 11 other agents. Why? Not to cleanse the world of evil, but to protect himself. He crossed the line from a radical, misguided vigilante to a domestic terrorist willing to slaughter the very police forces he claimed to champion.
But it is the murder of Naomi Misora that truly highlights the depths of Light's depravity.
Misora was a brilliant detective, potentially the one person who had connected the Ray Penba bus hijacking to Kira's methodology before anyone else. When Light encountered her, he realized she was a threat. He didn't just kill her, he manipulated her. He played on her grief over her fiancé's death. He smiled at her, gained her trust, and convinced her to hand over her real name. And as she walked away to her death, a suicide forced by his weapon, he mocked her. I know monsters. I have looked into the eyes of the Joker as he laughed over a broken body. I have seen the Riddler gloat over a death trap. Light Yagami's smug, sociopathic smile as he watched a grieving woman walk to her execution places him firmly among the worst of Arkham's inmates. He feels no empathy. He views human beings entirely as chess pieces, evaluating them solely by their utility or the threat they pose to his grand design. Part Roman 4, The Weapon and the Supernatural Element. I am no stranger to the supernatural.
I have fought alongside Wonder Woman, I have consulted John Constantine, and I have faced the magic of the Lazarus Pits.
Magic is simply a science we do not yet fully understand. The weapon Light wields, the Death Note, is a tool of dark magic.
Based on the rules deduced from Kira's victims, the parameters are strict. The human whose name is written in this note shall die.
This note will not take effect unless the writer has the person's face in their mind when writing his or her name. Therefore, people sharing the same name will not be affected. The default cause of death is a heart attack in 40 seconds. The user can manipulate the time and cause of death provided it is physically possible for the victim to perform the actions before dying.
Furthermore, my analysis of the second Kira Misa, our main phenomenon, indicates a secondary supernatural variable. The second Kira could kill without knowing her name, implying she made some sort of fortune bargain, trading a portion of her lifespan for Shinigami eyes, the ability to see a person's name and lifespan just by looking at them. This confirms the existence of high-dimensional entities attached to these notebooks. Death gods. Shinigami. Lightnovel is accompanied by one. He is being observed by a creature of death, likely entertained by the chaos light is causing. But the Shinigami is a neutral observer. The notebook is merely a tool. The true evil is the human operating the pen. The notebook corrupts absolutely. During the Otsuba arc, when Light temporarily forfeited his memories of being Kira, he reverted to a moral, highly intelligent, and empathetic young detective. He was appalled by Kira's actions. This proves that Light possessed the capacity for good.
But it also proves something far more tragic. The moment absolute power was handed to him, his moral foundation crumbled instantly.
He lacked the discipline, the trauma, and the code required to wield power without letting it consume him. I trained for a decade, pushing my body and mind to the breaking point to ensure I would never cross the line and become a killer. Light Yagami found a notebook in a courtyard and became a mass murderer in 5 days. He is weak. Part V categorization. The rogue gallery comparison. How do I categorize Light Yagami among the threats I face? He shares similarities with Ra's al Ghul. Both believe the current world is irredeemably corrupt and requires a massive, lethal purge to reset. Both view themselves as the rightful rulers of this new world. But Raz is a warrior.
He leads from the front, commands an army of assassins, and respects his adversaries.
Raz fights for his twisted vision with a blade in his hand. Light cowers in his bedroom, writing names in a book, terrified of being caught.
He shares the lethal philosophy of Jason Todd.
Red Hood believes that some criminals are beyond saving and must be put down to protect the innocent.
But Jason limits his targets to the worst of the worst mob bosses, murderers, abusers.
Jason knows he is damned, and he accepts that burdens so others don't have to. Light, on the other hand, expanded his targets to petty thieves, lazy citizens, and anyone who insulted him on the internet. Light doesn't think he's damned, he thinks he is divine. In truth, Light Yagami is most similar to Edward Nygma the Riddler. Both are defined by an astronomical, unquenchable need to prove their intellectual superiority. Both view their crimes not as atrocities, but as elaborate puzzles designed to demonstrate their genius. Light's entire cat and mouse game with L was not about justice, it was a deadly game of chess to prove who was the smartest man on the planet. Like Nygma, Light's ego is his Achilles heel. If you insult his intelligence, if you make him feel inferior, he will abandon caution, break his own rules, and make catastrophic mistakes. Part V Light, the L factor, and the failure of justice. It is impossible to analyze Light Yagami without assessing the man who hunted him. The detective known as L. L was without question a genius. His deductive leaps were staggering. To isolate Kira's location, psychological profile, and modus operandi within weeks of the first heart attacks is a feat I respect. But L's morality was compromised. L was perfectly willing to sacrifice human lives to test his theories. He used Lindell, Taylor as bait, knowing the man would die.
He tested the notebook's rules by proposing that condemned inmates use it.
He held Light and Misa in solitary confinement, subjected them to psychological torture, and treated the entire investigation like a high-stakes puzzle rather than a mission to save lives. L did not care about justice, he cared about winning. He cared about solving the puzzle. That is the fundamental difference between L and Batman. I do not sacrifice the innocent, or even the guilty, to catch my prey. I do not use human lives as bait. L fought a game. I fight a war to protect every single life, no matter how insignificant it may seem. L's willingness to operate in the ethical grey area is ultimately what led to his death. He let Light get too close. He compromised his own security for the sake of the game. I would not make the same mistake. Part Ramen 7 Countermeasures Protocol False Idol. If Kira were to emerge in Gotham City, or if I were forced to track him globally, direct physical confrontation would be the final, trivial step. The true battle would be informational and psychological. Phase 1 Information Blackout and Identity Protection. Kira requires a name and a face. Bruce Wayne is one of the most famous men on the planet.
His face and name are everywhere.
But Bruce Wayne is not my true self, it is the mask I wear. If Light Yagami wrote Batman in a Death Note, nothing would happen. Batman is an alias. If he looked at a picture of Bruce Wayne and wrote Bruce Wayne, I would die. Therefore, the absolute separation of these identities is paramount. My cowl is shielded, lead-lined, polarized, and equipped with facial recognition scrambling tech to prevent any digital mapping of my underlying bone structure. To Kira, I am a faceless shadow, but I cannot operate solely as Batman. I must use Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne would immediately fund the anti-Kira task force. He would be vocal, arrogant, and publicly critical of Kira. I would make Bruce Wayne a prime target. However,
Before making those statements, I would utilize Wayne Enterprises' biomedical division to synthesize a localized temporary cardiac suppression agent, a variation of the tetrodotoxin I used to fake my own death.
When Light eventually writes Bruce Wayne's name, my heart would stop.
To the world, Bruce Wayne would die of a heart attack.
By feigning my own death, I eliminate Bruce Wayne from the board, freeing me to operate entirely in the shadows without Kira suspecting the Batman is still hunting him.
Phase 2 Tactical Misdirection and Bait.
Light cannot resist a challenge. I would use the Batcomputer's deep-faking algorithms and global satellite network to broadcast a new, untraceable adversary.
Not an individual, but an idea. A synthesized voice, a blank screen, broadcasting undeniable proof of Kira's psychological weaknesses to the world. I would mock him. I would deconstruct his god complex publicly. I would explain to the masses that he isn't a god, but a scared, privileged child hiding in his room. This psychological pressure would force him to react. He would scramble to find the source. He would mobilize his pawns Terry Mikami, Guillermo Tekada, or whatever sycophants he has manipulated.
Watching where he directs his focus, I can trace the data flow backward.
Phase 3 Environmental Neutralization. When I finally locate him, I will not walk through the front door and introduce myself like Elle did. I will not sit handcuffed to him in a hotel room. I will strike in the dead of night. The Death Note is paper. It can burn. It can be destroyed.
It can be neutralized.
I would deploy a localized EMP to knock out the power grid of his sector, blinding his surveillance. My stealth suit is woven with metamaterials that bend ambient light, rendering me effectively invisible in the dark. I would breach his location using silent, ultrasonic cutters. He would not hear me coming. He would not see my face.
If he attempts to write, I wouldn't waste time talking.
A microbatteram laced with a fast-acting paralyzing neurotoxin derived from the venom of the Kinyu snail would be embedded in his writing hand before his pen could touch the paper. A second strike would shatter his wrist. Phase 4 Apprehension and Containment.
Once neutralized, the Death Note would be secured in a hazard containment biovault, shielded by NTH metal, and permanently locked away in the deepest levels of the Batcave, where no human and no Shinigami could ever access it again.
I would not kill Light Yagami. That is not my way, and frankly, death is a release he does not deserve. I would drag him out of his bedroom, strip him of his notebook, and expose his crimes to the world. I would ensure every piece of evidence, every hidden slip of paper in his watch, every manipulated victim was broadcast globally. I would destroy the myth of Kira. I would let the world see him for what he truly is, not a god, not a savior, but a weeping, broken, narcissistic child who couldn't handle the consequences of his own arrogance.
He would spend the rest of his natural life in a specialized, solitary containment cell in Blackgate or Arkham, stripped of all human contact, left alone with the absolute knowledge that his new world rejected him.
Final verdict: Light Yagami looked at a flawed, struggling world and decided that mass execution was the only viable solution. He traded his humanity for a supernatural weapon, believing his intellect gave him the right to act as judge, jury, and executioner. He is the ultimate cautionary tale of power without discipline. He claims to be the god of the new world, but in the end, he is just another criminal operating in the dark. And criminals are a cowardly and superstitious lot. When the shadow of the bat falls upon him, his notebook will not save him. His Shinigami will not intervene. He will face justice. True, unyielding justice. End of log. System command. Encrypt file.
Authorization Wayne Omega 0.
The interrogation room was a sensory void, a perfectly engineered cube of cold tungsten and sound-dampening acoustic foam buried hundreds of feet beneath the bedrock of Gotham City. The ambient temperature was locked at an unforgiving 54 degrees. There were no mirrors, no windows, and no cameras visible to the naked eye.
The air smelled faintly of ozone and sterilized steel.
At the center of the room, bolted to the floor, was a heavy metallic table. On one side sat Light Yagami. He had been stripped of his immaculately tailored suit and dressed in a featureless, light grey containment uniform. His wrists were secured to the table by magnetic subdermal cuffs, technology far beyond anything the Japanese task force or L had ever possessed. He had no watch, no pen,
no hidden scraps of paper in his pockets.
For the first time since a notebook fell from the sky into his high school courtyard,
Light Yagami was utterly, entirely powerless.
Across from him, submerged in the impenetrable shadows of the room's single overhead light, sat the Batman. The Dark Knight was a monolithic silhouette of kinetic armor and Kevlar. His face was entirely obscured.
The cowl covered his head and jaw, and the stark white lenses covering his eyes were polarized, heavily shielded, and laced with an algorithmic scramble mesh.
Even if Light possessed the Shinigami eyes, the facial recognition necessary to see a name was physically blocked. To the boy who needed a name and a face to kill, the man sitting across from him was a terrifying, invincible void. Floating in the corner of the room, completely invisible to the Dark Knight, was Ryok. The Shinigami was suspended upside down, his elongated limbs draped over the ceiling, a grotesque, jagged grin stretched across his face.
Ha ha ha, I gotta hand it to him, like Ryok chuckled, his raspy voice echoing only in Light's mind. I'll put you in handcuffs, but this guy, he stripped you down to your soul, and I don't think he's going to wash my feet. Light ignored the death god.
He arranged his face into a mask of perfect, terrified innocence.
His large brown eyes widened, projecting the image of a brilliant, wrongfully accused university student.
I don't know who you are, Light began, his voice trembling with perfectly calibrated anxiety.
But this is an international crime. Kidnapping a Japanese citizen, the son of the deputy director of the MPA. My father is Sokairo Yagami.
You are making a catastrophic mistake. If this is about a Kira investigation, I am the second Nell.
I'm leading the task force.
I'm trying to stop Kira. Batman did not move.
He did not speak.
The silence in the room stretched for 10 agonizing seconds, heavy and suffocating.
Then Batman reached into the shadows of his cape and placed an object on the center of the steel table. It was a standard issue silver analog watch.
Light's watch. Batman pressed a hidden mechanism on his gauntlet.
With a sharp mechanical click, the back of the watch popped open. 4 tiny, modified robotic pincers extended from Batman's gauntlet, delicately extracting the hidden false bottom. Beneath it lay a microscopic pinprick needle and a neatly folded 2-inch scrap of paper from the Death Note. Light's breath hitched in his throat.
The innocent facade cracked just for a millimeter before he forced it back in place. I don't know what that is, Light stammered, though his heart rate, monitored by the sensors in the table, spiked imperceptibly. Someone must have planted that on me.
Kuru Otoharada, Batman's voice finally broke the silence.
It was a terrifying mechanized rasp that vibrated in Light's chest, devoid of any human warmth. Dead of a heart attack in Shinjuku.
Takuro Shibumaru,
Struck by a truck in Shibuya. Ray Penba. Naomi Misora. Del Laureate.
Mahori, Terry Mikami, Kiyomi Takada.
Batman leaned forward, the white lenses of his cowl piercing the dim light.
I have spent the last 3 weeks dismantling your empire, Light.
I found the hidden compartment in your desk drawer. I bypassed the false bottom and the gasoline trap.
I secured the notebook you buried in the forest, and I neutralized Mikami before he could ever open his vault. I have the book, the real one. It is currently locked inside a lead-line biovault, submerged in a 0 Kelvin cryogenic stasis field, guarded by automated defenses that do not have names, faces, or biological hearts.
Batman paused, letting the absolute finality of his words crush the air out of the room.
The game is over, Kira.
You lost. The Mask Falls Ryok began to cackle loudly, slapping his knees as he floated in the air.
Oh, this is priceless.
He got everything, Light. He even found the death trap.
I told you it was a bad idea to leave gasoline lying around.
Light stared at the scrap of paper on the table.
The silence returned, but this time, the trembling anxiety vanished.
The wide, innocent eyes narrowed, the pupils contracting into sharp, predatory slits. The posture of the frightened student evaporated, replaced by the arrogant, regal slouch of the demon god.
Light let out a low, dark chuckle.
It grew into a manic, echoing laugh that bounced off the acoustic walls, a sound entirely devoid of sanity or warmth.
You think you won.
Light sneered, his voice dropping an octave, dripping with contempt. You think securing a notebook makes you the victor?
Look at the world outside this miserable cave. Global crime rates have plummeted by 74%. Wars are stopped. The innocent walk the streets at night without fear, knowing that a divine hand watches over them.
I didn't just play a game, you mask freak.
I changed the fundamental nature of humanity. I became God.
You became a serial killer with a supernatural sniper rifle, Batman countered, his voice an unyielding bedrock of cold logic.
You didn't change human nature. You held it hostage.
You enforced a planetary reign of terror built on the threat of instantaneous assassination.
Terror.
Light spat, leaning as far forward as the magnetic cuffs would allow.
The only people terrified of Kira are the ones who deserve to rot. Murderers, rapists, corrupt politicians who exploit the weak. I took the trash of the world and incinerated it. The justice systems of the world are a joke.
They let monsters out on technicalities.
They allowed the wealthy to buy their freedom. I fixed it. I gave them a consequence they could not evade, could not bribe, and could not outrun. Light glared at the impenetrable black cowl.
You operate in the shadows, just like I do.
You break the law to hunt criminals.
You shatter bones, you use fear, you terrify the underworld.
We are exactly the same. The only difference is that you're a coward who refuses to finish the job, and I had the absolute conviction to cross the line.
We are nothing alike, Batman growled.
The air in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees.
I use fear as a deterrent to stop the innocent from being harmed.
I bring criminals to the light so they can face the system flawed as it is, because the alternative one-man acting as judge, jury, and executioner is the definition of tyranny.
Batman tapped a gauntleted finger on the steel table. If you truly believed you were a righteous god,
Batman continued,
his tone shifting into the analytical cadence of the world's greatest detective. You would have only killed the guilty, but you didn't, did you, Light?
Let's talk about Lindell.
Taylor. Light's jaw tightened. A man goes on television, claims to be the police, and calls you evil, Batman said.
He poses no physical threat to you. He is not a murderer roaming the streets.
He's merely an investigator challenging your ego.
And what did the god of the New World do? Did he ignore the insult like a true deity?
No, you threw a temper tantrum. You executed him on live television simply because he hurt your feelings.
It was a tactical necessity. Light shot back, his composure fraying at the edges. He was an obstacle to the New World.
Anyone who stands in the way of global peace is a threat that must be eliminated.
He was an obstacle to your ego, Batman corrected ruthlessly. And then there was Ray Pember,
an FBI agent doing his job. 12 innocent law enforcement officers slaughtered.
Not because they were evil.
Because they were looking for you.
And Naomi Missouri didn't just kill her.
You manipulated a grieving widow.
You walked her to a noose and smiled while you did it. Batman stood up.
He towered over the table, a monstrous shadow blocking out the overhead light.
You aren't a god, Light.
You're a narcissist with a fragile ego.
You stumbled upon the weapon you didn't understand, and the moment you used it you couldn't handle the guilt of being a murderer.
So you invented a delusion.
You convinced yourself you were a savior, because the alternative was admitting that you are just a pathetic, bored teenager who killed 2 men in a fit of juvenile arrogance.
Through intellectual desperation, Light's chest heaved.
His mind, the most brilliant tactical engine of his generation, spun into overdrive. He was cornered, physically and ideologically, but he had never lost a battle of wits.
He analysed the man before him.
He knows everything, Light thought, his eyes darting across the Kevlar plating, the utility belt, the shielded cowl.
He knows about the rules of the notebook.
He knows about Shinigami eyes.
That's why his face is hidden. That's why his voice is modulated.
But he's human. He has an ego. Everyone has an ego. Al thought he had me figured out, too, Light said, his voice lowering into a deadly, calculated whisper.
Al thought he was the smartest man in the room. He chained himself to me. He watched my every move.
And he died looking into my eyes, realizing I had beaten him. You think you're better than Al?
Al treated you like a puzzle, Batman replied coldly.
He was arrogant.
He believed the game was more important than the lives at stake. He let you operate, let you kill, just to gather evidence to prove his own intellectual superiority.
He died because he played by the rules of your game.
And you don't. Light mocked. I don't play games. Light smirked.
Oh, but you do. You're sitting here monologuing to me.
You want me to admit defeat. You want the satisfaction of breaking Kira. You're a vigilante operating out of some twisted sense of trauma. The bat motif of theatricality, it's all psychological projection.
You're trying to scare criminals because you were terrified once.
Light leaned in, his eyes wide, analytical, probing for a weakness.
You're wealthy, Light deduced rapidly.
The technology holding me here at the cryogenic stasis field you mentioned, the localized EMPs, this isn't police tech. This is billions of dollars in private R&D.
You're an aristocrat,
an American billionaire with a savior complex.
You hide behind a mask because you have a public face to protect. If I had my notebook, if I had just 10 seconds, I could deduce your identity, write your name, and watch your pathetic crusade end in a coronary spasm.
Ooh, he's trying to profile you, Bats, Ryder chuckled, floating down to inspect Batman's cowl.
Not gonna lie, I'd love to see his name too.
But this guy, he doesn't smell like fear.
He smells like a reinforced concrete wall.
Batman did not flinch at Light's deductions.
He simply let the boy finish his frantic attempt to regain control.
Your deductive reasoning is exceptional, Batman admitted softly, his voice devoid of praise.
But it is useless. You are looking for a way to win the chess match, but the board has already been flipped.
Batman reached over and picked up the tiny scrap of the Death Note with his mechanical pincers.
I know the rules of the notebook, Light, Batman said.
I know about the 13-day rule you fabricated to clear your name.
I know about the Shinigami that hovers around you, invisible to anyone who hasn't touched the paper.
Light's blood ran cold. He knows about Ryuk.
But he hasn't touched the note. I didn't need to touch the book to deduce the existence of an observer, Batman explained, anticipating Light's thought process.
The second Kira's tapes mention Shinigami.
The erratic behavior you exhibited in solitary confinement talking to empty space confirmed the presence of a higher dimensional entity tied to the artifact.
You believe having a death god on your side makes you invincible.
But the Shinigami is just a parasite. They don't care about your new world.
They are just waiting for you to die, so they can write your name and return home. Light's eyes flicked instinctively toward the corner where Ryuk was floating.
Ryuk offered a wide, jagged wave. He's got my number, Light.
Ryuk laughed hysterically. This guy is way more fun than L.
You have nothing, Batman stated. The absolute certainty in his voice was crushing. You have no book.
You have no followers.
Your father died believing you were innocent because you manipulated him on his deathbed. You traded your sister's sanity, your father's life, and your own soul for a delusion of grandeur. The god of nothing, the mention of Soakairo Yagami was the final fracture.
Light's perfectly constructed psychological architecture collapsed.
The absolute, unyielding reality of his defeat, presented without the theatricality of Elsgane's broken.
Shut up! Light screamed, his voice cracking, the aristocratic composure shattering into the hysterical shriek of a cornered animal. He thrashed against the magnetic cuffs, the metal table groaning under the force. I am Kira. I am the god of the new world.
You cannot do this to me.
I am the only one who could fix IT. The world was rotting. IT was disgusting.
I gave them light. I gave them purpose.
Batman stood utterly still, watching the boy thrash. There was no triumph in the Dark Knight's posture, only the deep, profound pity, mixed with absolute disgust. Without me, the world will plunge back into chaos. Light shrieked, saliva flying from his lips, his eyes bloodshot and manic.
Crime will skyrocket.
The wars will begin again. The blood of millions will be on your hands, you masked freak. You're condemning the world to death by stopping me. The world will survive, Batman said quietly. It will struggle, it will bleed,
but it will choose its own path.
A world held at gunpoint is not a world at peace. It is a prison, and you were just the warden. Light collapsed back into his chair, gasping for breath, his chest heaving. His wrists were bruised from straining against the magnetic locks. The manic energy drained from him, leaving only the hollow, terrified realization of his future.
What are you going to do with me?
Light whispered, his voice trembling, sounding for the first time like the scared high school student he actually was.
Are you going to kill me?
No, Batman replied, turning his back on the table.
Killing you would make you a martyr. Your followers would build a religion around your execution. They would say the god of the new world died for their sins. Batman walked toward the heavy steel door. The Japanese task force believes Kira is dead.
The SBK believes Kira is dead.
The world will be told that Kira's power faded and he vanished, Batman said, pausing at the threshold.
You will not get a public trial.
You will not get a stage to preach your twisted gospel. You will be erased.
Light's eyes widened in sheer existential terror. To a narcissist, death is preferable to irrelevance.
You will spend the rest of your natural life in a secure, subterranean facility, Batman continued, his voice echoing in the cold room. No windows. No human contact. No news of the outside world. You will sit in the dark light, and you will watch the years tick by knowing that the world moved on without you. You will know that the god of the new world was nothing more than a footnote in history.
No! Light screamed, lunging forward, the cuffs locking him brutally in place.
You can't. I am Kira. You have to acknowledge me. You have to. I acknowledge nothing, Batman said. Batman pressed a sequence on his gauntlet. The single overhead light flickered and died, plunging the interrogation room into absolute, pitch-black darkness. The heavy vault door hissed open and slammed shut, sealing with the final echoing boom that vibrated through the floorboards. Light Yagami was left alone in the dark. For a moment, there was only the sound of his own ragged breathing. Then two glowing, demonic yellow eyes materialized in the darkness above him. Well, Light, Rylok's raspy voice echoed in the suffocating black. I told you from the very beginning, when it's your time to die, I'll be the one writing your name in my notebook. But looking at this place, staring at these walls for the next 50 years.
Rylok chuckled, the sound devoid of any pity or malice, just the cold indifference of a death god.
I think I'd rather die than be bored. But you've got a long time to think about it. Catch you later, god of the new world. The yellow eyes vanished, and Light Yagami began to scream, a sound that no one anywhere in the world would ever hear again.
Back computer audio log, timestamp 0400 hours.
Subject file, comparative psychological analysis, protocol, dual sovereigns. Subject Lelouch, Roman 6 Britannia anomaly, designation 0. And Light Yagami anomaly, designation Kira. Objective threat reassessment, moral categorization, and determination of rehabilitation viability. Audio recording commences. I have spent my entire life studying the architecture of the criminal mind. I have mapped the fractured psyches of Gotham's worst, tracing the fault lines of trauma, greed, and madness that lead men to commit unspeakable acts. I have learned to categorize monsters. I know which ones can be pulled back from the abyss and which ones must simply be locked away in the dark. Over the past week I have sat across from two of the most dangerous anomalies I have ever encountered. Two young men, both in their late teens when they began their crusades. Both gifted with genius-level intellects.
Both handled artifacts of absolute supernatural power.
And both ultimately succeeded in conquering their respective worlds, bending billions of human lives to their will.
To the untrained eye, Lelouch, Roman 6 Britannia, and Light Yagami are identical archetypes, megalomaniacal tyrants who played God and bathed their planets in blood.
But sitting across from them, reading their micro-expressions, analysing their heart rates, and deconstructing their philosophies, I realised that they represent two entirely diametric paradigms of human corruption. One is a tragic figure crushed by the weight of his own empathy, the other is a hollow vessel of malignant narcissism. This log serves as a step-by-step comparative reasoning of their psychological profiles. It is my final judgment on the Demon Emperor and the God of the New World. Step 1. The Catalyst, Trauma versus Solipsism. To judge a man's soul, you must look at the crucible that forged him.
Lelach Roman 6 Britannia's worldview was forged in extreme systemic trauma.
He was born into the Holy Britannian Empire, a global superpower explicitly built on a philosophy of social Darwinism, the absolute subjugation of the weak by the strong.
His father, Emperor Charles I Britannia, was a monster who viewed his own children as disposable chess pieces.
Lelach watched his mother get assassinated. He watched his younger sister Nunnally be crippled and blinded by the trauma. He was then exiled to a hostile nation as a political hostage, left to die.
Lelach's descent into darkness was a reaction to a genuinely evil system.
His foundational motivation was love, a desperate, clawing need to create a gentle world where his sister could open her eyes and be safe. When he received the Geese, he weaponized it against a tyrannical regime. Light Yagami's origins are the exact opposite.
Light was born into a loving, stable, upper-middle-class family.
His father,
Sir Kairo Yagami,
was the deputy director of the Japanese National Police Agency, a man of unyielding moral integrity, a paragon of conventional justice.
Light possessed flawless looks, a brilliant mind, and a guaranteed path to the highest echelons of society.
He suffered no trauma.
He experienced no systemic oppression.
Light Yagami became a mass murderer because he was bored. He looked at a world that had given him everything and declared it rotten purely out of teenage cynicism.
When he found the Death Note and accidentally killed 2 men, he did not experience a traumatic break.
He experienced an ego crisis, unable to reconcile his self-image as a perfect student with the reality that he had committed double murder. He constructed a delusion. He convinced himself the murders were righteous, and therefore he must be a god chosen to cleanse the world. Conclusion on Catalyst. Lelach's crusade was born from agonizing empathy and a desire to protect the vulnerable. Light's crusade was born from a solipsistic need to justify his own mistakes. Lelach fought a corrupt world, Light fought his own boredom. Step 2. The methodology. The general versus the sniper. Both subjects utilize supernatural weapons with absolute lethality, but their application of power reveals their true character. Lelach's weapon,
the Geese of absolute obedience, requires direct eye contact.
To use it, Lelach had to physically place himself on the battlefield. He had to look his victims in the eyes. He built the Black Knights, commanded armies in the mud, piloted nightmare frames, and stood on the front lines of global conflicts. He used his power to orchestrate revolutions, manipulate economies, and dismantle military hierarchies. Yes, he violated free will, a sin I fundamentally abhor, but he did so while exposing himself to the physical and emotional crossfire. He felt the blood on his hands. Light Yagami's weapon, the Death Note, allows for instantaneous, untraceable assassination from anywhere on the planet, provided the user knows a name and a face. Light operated entirely from the shadows of his bedroom. He took no physical risks. He never looked his victims in the eyes as they died. He treated human lives like data entries on a spreadsheet, striking from a place of absolute cowardly safety. When law enforcement closed in, he didn't fight them on a battlefield. He manipulated them, used their loved ones as shields, and executed them from behind a desk. Furthermore, we must examine the escalation of their targets. When Lelach was forced to cross moral lines, it was usually a calculated, desperate tactical maneuver against military targets. When his power tragically malfunctioned, resulting in his sister Euphemia massacring innocents, Lelach was psychologically shattered. He weaponized the tragedy to further his rebellion, which is an atrocity, but the guilt of Euphemia's death haunted him until his dying breath.
He hated himself for it.
Light Yagami felt no such guilt. When FBI agent Ray Pember investigated him, Light didn't just kill him, he went out of his way to murder Pember's grieving fiancée, Naomi Misura. He looked Misura in the eye, gained her trust, and smiled mockingly as he sent her to hang herself. Light did not kill investigators out of tragic necessity, he killed them with sadistic glee. He relished in his superiority. Conclusion on methodology. Lelach was a ward who dirted his own hands and accepted the horrors of the battlefield. Light was a supernatural sniper, a coward who viewed humanity as an ant farm he could burn with a magnifying glass for his own amusement. Step 3. The climax of power. Sacrifice versus megalomania. The ultimate test of a man is not how he handles adversity, but how he handles absolute power. Both anomalies successfully defeated their enemies. Lelach usurped his father, conquered the United Federation of Nations, and gained absolute control over the globe. Light defeated the Detective L, infiltrated the police task force, and forced the world's governments to bow to Kira out of sheer terror.
How did they spend their reigns?
When Lelouch Roman VI Britannia achieved absolute power, he immediately initiated the Zero Requiem. He intentionally became the most hated tyrant in human history. He dismantled the oppressive Britannian aristocracy, abolished global borders, and centralized all the world's hatred, malice, and vengeance onto his own shoulders. And then he arranged for his best friend to run a sword through his chest on live television.
Lelouch recognized that his hands were too stained with blood to ever hold the peace he created. He knew that the only way to break the cycle of violence was to offer himself as the ultimate scapegoat. He died so that his sister and the world could live in peace.
He did not want to be a god. He wanted to be a martyr.
When Light Yagami achieved absolute power, he basked in it.
He declared himself the god of the new world.
He demanded absolute worship.
He began killing not just violent criminals, but petty thieves, lazy citizens, and anyone who dared to speak out against him.
He grew fat on his own hubris, convinced of his sheer infallibility.
When Light was finally cornered in the yellow box warehouse by Nia
and the SBK, he did not accept responsibility.
He threw a hysterical tantrum. He screamed.
He begged.
He tried to manipulate his loyal followers, and when they failed him, he cursed them. He died writhing in the dirt, terrified, alone, and completely unwilling to accept that he was anything less than divine. Conclusion on power. Given the world, Lelouch broke himself to save it.
Given the world, Light broke it to worship himself.
Step 4. The interrogation aftermath. My direct encounters with both subjects within the Batgear's interrogation cells confirmed my empirical data. When I interrogated Lelouch, I confronted him with his sins. I laid out the body count, the violation of free will, the manipulation of his friends. Lelouch did not deny a single accusation. He did not make excuses. He absorbed my condemnation with the quiet dignity of a man who has already judged himself more harshly than anyone else ever could.
He challenged my methodology.
He argued eloquently, and my refusal to cross the line merely perpetuates a cycle of violence in Gotham. We engaged in a profound ideological debate. I despise his methods, and I reject his consequentialist philosophy, but I cannot deny his intellectual integrity.
He possesses a moral compass. It is simply calibrated to a frequency I refuse to operate on.
When I threatened him, he accepted the challenge with calm respect. When I interrogated Light Yagami, I stripped him of his death note and his anonymity. I reduced him to a helpless human being.
His reaction was catastrophic.
Once his facade of innocence failed, he devolved into a shrieking, manic child.
He tried to deduce my identity to threaten me.
He hurled insults.
He justified his mass murders as a divine right.
And when he realized that I was going to lock him away in absolute darkness, erasing his legacy entirely, he begged. He screamed for recognition.
Light's psychological architecture is entirely dependent on external validation and absolute control.
He has no internal moral compass. He only has his ego. He's a textbook malignant narcissist.
Step 5. The verdict. The line between damnation and redemption in my war against crime. I have held fast to a single, unwavering principle. I believe in the possibility of redemption.
I refuse to kill the Joker, Two-Face, or the Riddler, not because I enjoy fighting them, but because the moment I decide a soul is beyond saving, I become an executioner. I fund rehabilitation programs.
I offer jobs to former henchmen at Wayne Enterprises.
I believe that humanity, no matter how deeply it has fallen, has the capacity to climb back toward the light.
But redemption is not something I can force upon someone. It has absolute, non-negotiable prerequisites. The subject must possess empathy. The subject must be capable of recognizing their own faults. The subject must feel genuine remorse for the pain they have caused. Based on these parameters, my final judgment is absolute.
Subject. Light Yagami Kira verdict beyond redemption. Light Yagami is unredeemable.
Not because of the sheer volume of his body count, though it is staggering, but because he is psychologically incapable of fulfilling the prerequisites for rehabilitation.
He lacks empathy entirely.
He views other human beings not as people with inner lives, but as variables in a mathematical equation designed to output his own glory.
He is incapable of recognizing his faults.
To Light, any failure is the fault of someone else's incompetence, Mikami's mistake, Masei's foolishness, the task force's interference.
He feels absolutely no remorse. He regrets getting caught, but he does not regret a single life he snuffed out.
If I were to release Light Yagami or place him in a standard rehabilitation program, he would simply manipulate the psychiatrists.
He would feign recovery, wait patiently for decades if necessary, and the moment he found an opportunity, he would resume his slaughter. He is a cancer of the ego.
Therefore, Light Yagami will never see the sun again.
He will remain in the deep black solitary confinement wing beneath the Batcave.
He will have no human contact.
His name will be scrubbed from international databases. Hero will not die a martyr, he will simply cease to exist.
I will bear the sin of his indefinite detention because releasing him is a mathematical guarantee of mass murder.
He is a void, and you cannot redeem a void.
Subject: Lelouch, Roman 6, Britannia 0, verdict, capable of redemption, conditional observation.
Lelouch, Roman 6, Britannia has committed atrocities that rival the worst dictators in human history.
His use of Jeez is a violation of the sanctity of the human mind, an act I find physically repulsive.
But Lelouch is not a monster.
He is a deeply traumatized, hyper-intelligent young man who took the weight of a broken world upon his shoulders because he believed no one else could.
He meets all the prerequisites for redemption.
He possesses profound empathy. His entire revolution was born from the love of his sister and his grief over the Shinjuku ghetto massacre.
He recognizes his faults. He knows exactly what he is referring to himself as a demon.
And he feels agonizing, soul-crushing remorse.
Furthermore, Lelouch has already executed his own form of redemption.
The Zero Requiem was his penance.
He paid for his sins with his own life.
The fact that the immortal CC resurrected him is an anomaly outside of his original calculations. He is now operating as LL, wandering the fringes of the world, neutralizing rogue G's fragments. He is no longer seeking to rule. He is seeking to clean up the supernatural messes left behind by his father's regime and the G's directorate. In a twisted way, he is performing his own vigilante crusade. He is not a hero.
He is a dark, dangerous operative.
But he is a man who learned the cost of playing God and voluntarily stepped down from the throne.
I will not lock Lelouch away. I will not strip him of his freedom.
But I will watch him. I have deployed a constellation of Wayne Enterprises microsatellites specifically tuned to track his biometric signature. I have algorithms monitoring global geopolitical shifts for any signs of G's manipulation.
He is on probation.
As long as LL remains in the shadows fighting the supernatural threats that ordinary men cannot, and as long as he never attempts to usurp the free will of humanity on a global scale again, we will maintain an unspoken truce. I will allow him to walk the earth.
I will allow him to find whatever peace a man with his history can find. Because beneath the mask of Zero, beneath the terrifying intellect of the Demon Emperor, there is just a boy who wanted a gentle world. He is broken, he is dangerous,
but he is human.
And as long as he remains human, he is worthy of the chance to carry on. End of log.
System command, encrypt files under dual sovereigns.
Route light Yagami live port monitoring to primary console.
Lockdown cell block Omega.
Authorization, Wayne absolute.
The holding cell aboard the Justice League Watchtower was not a dungeon.
It was a sphere of transparent, hyper-reinforced promethium glass, suspended in the silent, zero-gravity vacuum of the station's lower observation deck. There were no shadows to hide in. The room was bathed in the cold, majestic, and terrifyingly vast light of the planet Earth, which rotated slowly, just a few thousand miles below.
At the center of this transparent sphere, seated at a seamless white table, was Light Yagami. He was restrained not by chains, but by a pair of sleek, glowing synthesized kryptonite polymer cuffs that neutralized his movement without bruising his skin. His tailored suit had been replaced by a pristine white containment uniform.
He had no pen, no scraps of paper,
no hidden compartments in his watch, because the watch had been confiscated by the Batman 3 days ago on Earth. Light stared out at the blue and green marbles suspended in the infinite blackness of space.
For years, he had called himself the god of the new world.
He had looked down on humanity from the metaphorical heights of his intellect, judging them, pruning them, enforcing his divine will. But sitting here, suspended in the literal heavens, looking down at the actual planet, Light Yagami felt profoundly, suffocatingly small. The door of the sphere hissed open with a soft, pressurized sigh. Superman walked in.
He did not emerge from the shadows like the Batman.
Kal-El entered fully illuminated, a towering figure in vibrant blue and red, the emblem of the House of El emblazoned across his chest.
He moved with a quiet, ground-shaking grace, his red cape whispering against the polished floor. His face was entirely unmasked. His features were chiseled, classic, and radiated an innate, impossible warmth.
But to Light Yagami, that warmth was the most offensive thing he had ever seen.
Superman pulled out a white chair and sat across from the boy. He did not slam his fists on the table. He did not attempt to intimidate. He simply looked at Light with eyes the color of a summer sky, eyes that could incinerate a city block, yet currently held only a deep, sorrowful patience. "Hello, Light," Superman said.
His voice was a rich, resonant baritone that carried no echo in the sound-dampened room.
It was the voice of a man who spent his life calming terrified people. "I demand to know the legal jurisdiction under which I am being held," Light responded immediately, slipping effortlessly into the persona of the brilliant, wrongfully accused university student.
His voice trembled with a perfectly calculated mixture of indignation and fear.
"I am a Japanese citizen.
I am the lead investigator of the Kira Task Force. You, the Justice League. You operate alongside international law. Abducting me is an act of terrorism.
If you are working with Al, or whoever that masked lunatic in Gotham was, you are making a catastrophic mistake.
I am trying to stop Kira. Superman did not interrupt. He let Light finish. He listened to the pitch of Light's voice, the cadence of his breath, and the microscopic physiological reactions of his body. Light, Superman said softly, folding his massive hands on the table. I can hear the blood moving through your veins.
I can hear the microcontractions of your vocal cords.
I can hear the exact rhythm of your heartbeat.
When a human being lies, their body undergoes subtle, involuntary stress responses.
Your heart rate hasn't elevated by a single beat per minute.
Your perspiration levels are flat. You are reciting a script.
You're entirely devoid of genuine fear for your safety, which means you believe you're still the smartest person in this room,
And you're simply waiting for me to fall for the lie.
Light's jaw tightened.
The innocent facade held for another fraction of a second before the sheer, overwhelming reality of the alien's biology made it obsolete.
Bruce Wayne found the notebook. Light, Superman continued, his voice devoid of triumph.
He secured it. He analyzed the writing. We have matched the microscopic graphite traces, the pressure patterns of your handwriting, and the DNA left on the pages to you. We have the video of you speaking to Naomi Misora before she vanished. We have the internal security footage of you smiling as Elle died.
The lie is over. Light stared at the Man of Steel.
The wide, frightened brown eyes slowly narrowed into sharp, predatory slits.
The posture of the aggrieved student melted away, replaced by the rigid, arrogant spine of a monarch.
Light Yagami leaned forward against his restraints.
He let out a soft, mocking exhalation of breath.
So, Light said, his voice dropping, its trembling cadence settling into a cold, aristocratic superiority.
The alien has come to judge the god.
Tell me, Kal-El.
Did you bring me up to this floating glass cage so you could feel tall?
Did you bring me up here to show me the world I saved? You didn't save it, Light, Superman replied firmly. You held it hostage.
I eradicated war.
Light's voice lashed out like a whip, echoing in the confined space. I reduced global violent crime by 74%.
Dictators stepped down out of fear.
Warlords disarmed.
The innocent could walk the streets of any city on Earth at midnight without looking over their shoulders.
I achieved in 6 years what you and your brightly coloured friends couldn't achieve in a lifetime.
Light sneered, his lip curling in profound disgust.
You possess the power to shatter tectonic plates. You can fly around the globe in seconds.
You can hear the screams of every victim on that planet down there. And what do you do with it? You catch falling helicopters. You stop bank robbers.
You throw petty thieves in jail so they can break out a week later and kill again.
You're an omnipotent being who acts like a beat cop. You're a waste of godhood.
Superman absorbed the insult without flinching. He looked out the window at the rotating Earth, watching the swirling white clouds over the Pacific Ocean.
Power isn't defined by what you have the ability to destroy, like Superman said quietly, his gaze returning to the boy.
It is defined by the restraint you show when you have the choice to use it.
Yes, I hear the screams.
I hear every single one of them.
And there are days, dark days, when I look down at that planet and I am tempted to fly down and disarm every military, tear the roofs off of every corrupt parliament, and force them to be peaceful.
Then why don't you? Light demanded, his eyes blazing with absolute, unyielding conviction.
If you know the system is broken, if you know the laws are inadequate, your refusal to act makes you complicit in the blood of the innocent.
You let them die because of your archaic Midwestern morality.
Because if I force them to be peaceful, they aren't peaceful, Superman said, his voice ringing with absolute clarity.
They are subjugated.
A world that only does the right thing because a god is pointing a loaded gun at their heads isn't a utopia, Light.
It's a prison.
And you didn't even have the courage to hold the gun yourself.
You hid in your bedroom and wrote names in a book.
Light bristled at the word cowardice.
It was a tactical necessity.
I operated from the shadows because humanity was not ready to see the face of their savior. I bore the absolute burden of judgment.
I took the sins of the world onto my own shoulders so they wouldn't have to.
Did you?
Superman asked, leaning forward, the immense gravity of his presence pressing down on Light. Bruce told me about another young man who you interrogated recently. Another brilliant boy with a supernatural power who conquered his world. A boy named Lelouch, Roman 6 Britannia.
Light's eyes narrowed further, unfamiliar with the name,
but instantly defensive. Lelouch also believed the world was rotting, Superman continued, his voice taking on a narrative, sorrowful cadence. He also believed that forced unification was the only way to break a cycle of tyranny. But there was a fundamental difference between you and him, Light.
When Lelouch achieved absolute power, he didn't demand worship.
He intentionally made himself the villain. He drew all the hatred of the world onto himself, and then he let his best friend kill him.
He sacrificed his life, his reputation, and his soul to buy his world a chance at peace.
He understood that a man who commits atrocities, even for a noble cause, has no right to rule the world he creates.
Superman pointed a massive finger at Light. You didn't want to sacrifice yourself. You wanted a throne.
You didn't start killing because you experienced profound trauma or because you wanted to protect a sister.
You started killing because you were a privileged, bored child who found a weapon, made a mistake, and couldn't handle the guilt of admitting you were a murderer.
You aren't the martyr of Light. You're a narcissist. Shut up, Light hissed, his face flushing with fury.
The composure was cracking. The one thing Light Yagami could not withstand was having his divine narrative deconstructed. You know nothing about the burden I carry. The Death Note corrupts the soul.
Anyone else who found it would have used it for wealth or petty revenge.
I'm the only one with the intellectual fortitude, the sheer force of will to use it to cleanse the world. I am the only one who could do it.
You killed Lindell.
Taylor because he insulted you on television, Superman stated, his voice dropping the narrative warmth and hitting with the force of an anvil.
Light froze.
You killed Ray Pember,
An innocent man, an FBI agent, doing his job because he was following you.
Superman continued, relentless in his moral prosecution. You killed Naomi Masura, a grieving woman who wanted justice for her fiancé, and you mocked her as she walked to her death.
You manipulated Miss Amain, a girl who loved you, cutting her lifespan in half just to use her as a pawn.
You didn't cleanse the world of evil, Light.
You just eliminated the competition. They were obstacles.
Light shouted, straining against the glowing cuffs.
To build a new world, you must clear the debris of the old one.
Small sacrifices are necessary for absolute peace.
No, Superman said, his voice vibrating with the absolute, unshakable moral authority of the Justice League.
Every life is the world. Every single one. The moment you start treating human lives as statistics, as acceptable losses in your grand equation, you have lost your humanity.
Lex Luthor uses the exact same logic.
He believes he is the only one smart enough to guide humanity into the future, and he is willing to kill millions to prove it.
You and Lex are exactly the same. Brilliant minds poisoned by cosmic arrogance.
Superman stood up from the table.
He turned his back on Light, looking out the massive window at the stars.
The tragedy of Light Yagami, Superman said softly, almost to himself, is that you really are brilliant. If you had applied that genius to the justice system you claimed to champion, if you had become a detective, a lawyer, or a lawmaker, you could have inspired millions.
You could have changed the world through the light.
But you chose the dark.
You chose the easy way. Murder from a distance is the easiest thing in the world. Behind Superman, hovering near the ceiling of the transparent sphere, a dark, jagged shadow began to coalesce.
Long gangly limbs extended from a tattered, black leather torso.
Spiked, leathery wings folded behind a hunched back, and a grotesque, wide-mouthed skull grinned down at the scene.
Ryuk the Shinigami floated in the zero-gravity environment, his yellow eyes wide with amusement.
Hehehe, this guy is something else, Light. Ryuk chuckled, his raspy, ethereal voice echoing only for those tied to the Death Note. I gotta say, the Bat guy was scary, but this guy...
He's making you look like a petulant toddler. And the view up here. Spectacular. They got any apples on this space station.
Light gritted his teeth, refusing to look up, refusing to acknowledge the Death God.
If he spoke to Ryuk now, Superman would think he was hallucinating, losing his mind.
Superman did not turn around.
He kept his eyes focused on the stars.
I don't think we have apples in the Watchtower commissary, Ryuk, Superman said calmly.
But I can have the Martian Manhunter check.
Light's heart stopped.
The blood drained from Light's face with such velocity he felt dizzy.
His eyes snapped up to Ryuk, then to the back of Superman's red cape.
Ryuk froze mid-chuckle. The Shinigami's glowing yellow eyes widened in genuine, unprecedented shock.
You can see me?
Ryuk asked, floating down slightly, staring at the Man of Steel.
Superman finally turned around.
He looked directly past Light, his blue eyes locking perfectly onto the invisible Death God.
When Bruce secured the notebook, Superman explained, his voice even. He placed it in an isolation vault.
But before he did, I flew to the Batcave to inspect it. I touched the paper. My vision encompasses the entire electromagnetic spectrum, Ryuk. I can see radio waves, gamma radiation, and the subatomic bonds of physical matter.
But touching that notebook aligned my visual cortex with whatever extra-dimensional frequency your species operates on. Superman took a step closer to the table, looking between the horrified human and the bewildered Shinigami. I know what you're, Superman said to Ryuk. You're a parasite. You drop weapons of mass destruction into the laps of children because you find human suffering entertaining. You watch them lose their souls, and when the game is over, you kill them and return to your realm. Hey, don't blame me for what the kid did with the toy, Ryuk protested, holding up his long, clawed hands in mock surrender, though he drifted slightly backward, instinctively intimidated by the sheer cosmic presence of the Kryptonian. I just wrote the rules. He's the one who decided to play God.
And the game is over, Superman declared. He looked back down at Light. The god of the new world was shivering.
The realization that Superman had seen Ryuk, that Superman fully comprehended the supernatural rules of the game and was completely unfazed by them, shattered the last remaining pillars of Light's psychological fortress. The mystery was gone. The divine superiority was erased.
He was just a murderer sitting in a glass box, and the alien before him was immune to his weapon, immune to his god, and immune to his rhetoric.
Well, what are you going to do with me?
Light whispered, his voice finally cracking, betraying the terrified, hollow boy beneath the tyrant.
If you hand me over to the authorities, Kira's followers will riot.
The world will tear itself apart, demanding my release.
You can't put me on trial.
You underestimate the resilience of humanity, Superman said. The world will shock you, Light. When they learn the truth, when they see the video of you mocking a widow, when they see the absolute cowardice of your methods, the myth of Kira will evaporate. They won't worship you. They will pity you. Superman placed both hands flat on the white table, leaning down until his face was level with Light's. Batman wanted to lock you in the dark forever, Superman said softly. He believes you are beyond redemption, a psychological void incapable of empathy. And perhaps he is right.
But I am not an executioner, and I am not a warden.
Superman straightened up. You will stand trial, Light Yagami, Superman declared. Not in a secret tribunal, but before an international court, televised for the entire world to see. You will face the families of the innocent people you murdered. You will face the parents of Ray Penber. You will face the family of Naomi Masura.
You will look them in the eyes without your notebook, without your Shinigami, and you will answer for what you have done.
They'll execute me, Light screamed, thrashing wildly against the glowing cuffs, the pristine containment suit rumpling as he lost all physical dignity.
I'm Kira.
I saved them. They owe me their lives. You cannot let them kill their god.
I don't believe in the death penalty, Superman said, his voice cutting through Light's hysteria with absolute, calming authority.
I will personally guarantee your physical safety. If convicted, you will serve your sentence in a specialized containment facility overseen by the Justice League. You will live a long, natural life, Light. And you will spend every single day of it watching the world move on without you. You will watch humanity solve its own problems, make its own mistakes, and build its own future free from the terror of your pen.
Superman turned and walked toward the door of the transparent sphere.
No, Kal-El, come back here. Light shrieked, tears of pure narcissistic rage streaming down his cheeks.
He pulled at the cuffs until his wrists turned red.
I am the protagonist of this world. You are just an alien anomaly.
You have no right to judge me.
Ryuk, write his name.
Write his name now. Superman paused at the threshold.
He glanced back not at Light, but at the Shinigami.
Ryuk was floating near the ceiling, holding his black notebook, his pen hovering over the pages. The Death God looked at Light, then at Superman.
Ryuk let out a long raspy sigh.
Sorry, Light, Ryuk said, scratching his chin with his pen. But his name isn't exactly human, is it?
Kal-El, Clark Kent.
Who knows which one the notebook would even accept? And honestly, I don't think my book works on Kryptonians. Even if it did, I'm not really in the mood to pick a fight with a guy who can throw me into the sun.
Ryuk floated down, hovering directly in front of Light's tear-streaked, furious face.
It was a fun run, kid, Ryuk chuckled. But the alien's right.
You lost.
And like I told you when it's your time to go, I'm the one who writes your name.
But looking at where you're headed, sitting in a cell for 60 years watching the world forget you, I think I saved my ink. Enjoy the rest of your human life, Light.
Ryuk phased backward, passing through the transparent Prometheum glass of the Watchtower, laughing hysterically as he drifted out into the vacuum of space, leaving Light Yagami entirely, absolutely alone.
Superman looked at the broken boy one last time. There was no hatred in the Man of Steel's eyes. Only a profound, heavy sorrow for a brilliant mind that had chosen the darkest possible path.
Goodbye, Light, Superman said softly.
He stepped out of the sphere. The pressurized door hissed shut, sealing automatically. Light Yagami collapsed forward against the table, sobbing, screaming obscenities into the sterile air, his voice bouncing off the soundproof glass unheard by the universe. Superman walked away down the metallic corridors of the Watchtower, his red cape billowing slightly in the recycled air. He listened to the boy's screams fade into the distance, carrying the weight of another tragedy on his shoulders, and went back to work. There was a world down there that needed protecting, not from gods or monsters, but from the darkness that lay within themselves. The Daily Planet Secure Archive, encrypted server author, Clark Kent file designation, unpublished editorial draft / eyes only title, The False Gods of a Fragile Earth, a study in power, will, and the boundaries of redemption. My father, Jonathan Kent, was a farmer who understood the earth in ways that no politician or philosopher ever could. He used to tell me that power is a lot like a thunderstorm rolling across the Kansas plains. When it unleashes its fury, it doesn't care about the morality of the crops it destroys or the fields it nourishes. The storm simply is. The only variable that matters is the structure you've built to weather it. I was given a thunderstorm. I was given the power to shatter mountains and outface the light, and the only thing that kept me from washing the world away was the structure my parents built inside my heart, a foundation of humility, restraint, and an unwavering belief in the inherent, inviolable dignity of human free will. Over the past month, I have been confronted with the terrifying reality of what happens when the thunderstorm is handed to those who lack the foundation. Through circumstances that cross the boundaries of our known reality, I found myself sitting across from two young men who had achieved the ultimate impossible nightmare, global subjugation. Two young men who looked at a fractured, bleeding world and decided that the only cure was to sever the free will of humanity. One wielded a pen that dealt death from the shadows. The other wielded a gaze that commanded absolute obedience. They were both brilliant, they were both young, and they both succeeded in playing God.
As a journalist, it is my sworn duty to document the truth, no matter how profoundly it shakes my own convictions.
As Superman, it is my burden to look into the souls of those who claim dominion over the earth and determine where the line of salvation is drawn. Having interrogated both Light Yagami, the entity known to his world as Kira, and Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia, the revolutionary known as Zero, and the 99th Emperor of the Holy Britannian Empire, I have compiled this psychological and moral autopsy. This is a categorization of their methodologies and analysis of their souls, and my final verdict on who is worthy of redemption and who has fallen beyond the reach of the light.
Part I, the architect of shadows, the void of light Yagami. When I walked into the Prometheum glass containment sphere on the Justice League watch hour, I did not find a god.
I found a void wrapped in the tailored suit of a university student.
Light Yagami's physiology told a story that his meticulously crafted lies tried to hide.
With my enhanced hearing, I listened to the steady, unbothered rhythm of his heart as he feigned ignorance, outrage, and terror. When a normal human being is wrongfully accused, their body betrays them, their adrenal glands flare, their capillaries dilate, their pulse stutters with the sheer injustice of the moment.
Light Yagami's body did none of these things.
He sat in a state of perfectly calibrated sociopathy.
He was a predator waiting for the prey to step into his trap.
It was only when I dismantled his illusion, when I revealed that Bruce Wayne had secured his supernatural weapon, the Death Note, and when I acknowledged the invisible, extra-dimensional parasite known as Ryo hovering over his shoulder, that Light's physiology finally reacted.
But what I heard was not the remorse of a fallen savior.
It was the hysterical, shrieking panic of a narcissist who had just realized he was no longer the protagonist of the universe. To understand Kira, one must understand the unique, cowardly nature of his weapon. The Death Note is an instrument of ultimate detachment. It requires only a name and a face. It allows the user to sit in the sterile comfort of their bedroom 1,000 miles away from the victim and extinguish a human life with the stroke of a pen. Light's crusade did not begin from a place of trauma. He did not witness the systematic slaughter of his people. He was not marginalized. He was a child of immense privilege, the son of a high-ranking police official, blessed with a genius intellect and a life devoid of true hardship. His initial motivation, by his own admission, was profound boredom. When he accidentally killed two men and realized the notebook's power, Light experienced a cognitive dissonance so severe that his ego shattered. Rather than face the horrific reality that he was a murderer, his mind constructed a messianic delusion. He convinced himself that the world was rotten, and only he possessed the intellectual and moral superiority to cleanse it. His reign was defined by an escalating cowardice. He claimed to kill only criminals to act as a harsh but necessary deterrent. Yet the moment his divine authority was questioned, the facade crumbled. He murdered Lindau, Taylor merely for calling him evil on television. He slaughtered 12 innocent FBI agents, including Ray Pember, not because they were corrupt, but because they were tracking him. But the truest reflection of Light Yagami's soul is found in the murder of Naomi Masura. I have confronted Lex Luthor. I have fought Darkseid. I have seen the darkest corners of the multiverse. But the intimate, psychological cruelty Light inflicted upon Naomi Masura chills me to the bone. He found a grieving woman desperately seeking justice for her murdered fiancé. He weaponized her grief. He offered her a warm smile, gained her trust, extracted her true name, and then mocked her as the supernatural compulsion forced her to walk to an unmarked grave to hang herself. He didn't just kill her, he extinguished her hope and laughed in the dark. Light Yagami did not love justice. He loved the intoxicating, absolute power of holding the scythe. He viewed humanity not as a family struggling to find its way, but as a ledger to be balanced, a spreadsheet of acceptable losses in the service of his own glorification. Part Roman 2. The Demon Emperor. The tragedy of Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia. My encounter with Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia occurred on Earth within the summer rain-lashed walls of Wayne Manor. If Light Yagami was a void, Lelouch was a collapsing star, singularity of immense crushing gravity, burning himself alive under the weight of his own sins. Lelouch's physiology was entirely different. Sustained by the immortal code of the entity, CC's heartbeat was the steady, unending drum of a man who has lived past his own death. Yet beneath that immortal composure, I could hear the microfractures in his psyche. Every breath he took seemed heavily burdened by the ghosts of the millions who died by his command. Unlike Light, Lelouch's worldview was forged in the fires of genuine, systemic atrocity. He was a prince of the Holy Britannian Empire, a fascistic global superpower that actively embraced social Darwinism, conquering sovereign nations and reducing their citizens to numbered, second-class slaves. Lelouch watched his mother get assassinated in a political crossfire. He watched his youngest sister, Nunnally, lose her sight and the use of her legs from the trauma.
Abandoned by a father who viewed his children as disposable assets, Lelouch was left to rot.
His motivation was not boredom.
It was a fierce, desperate love.
He wanted to shatter a world that fed on the weak and build a gentle world where his sister could open her eyes in peace. His weapon, the Geese, was a curse of absolute obedience. It was a horrific violation of cognitive liberty. To command a man to die, to force a soldier to turn his weapon on his comrades, to rewrite the memories of a loved one, it crosses every ethical boundary I have sworn to uphold.
But Lelouch's methodology stands in stark contrast to Light's.
The Geese requires direct eye contact.
Lelouch could not hide in a bedroom.
He had to stand on the battlefield.
He had to look into the eyes of the men he was destroying.
He built the Black Knights from the ground up, standing in the mud and the blood of the Shinjuku ghetto.
He felt the kinetic impact of every life he took. When tragedy struck, when his Genes mutated, and he accidentally commanded his beloved half-sister, Princess Euphemia, to massacre the innocent Japanese citizens of the Special Administrative Zone, Lelouch did not justify it to himself. He did not claim it was divine will. He was completely, utterly psychologically devastated. But rather than confess and let his rebellion die, he absorbed the atrocity. He painted Euphemia as the massacre princess bearing the agonizing guilt of defiling her memory to ensure the revolution survived.
He weaponized his own soul's destruction.
This culminated in the Zero
Requiem.
Upon conquering the world and claiming the Britannian throne, Lelouch did not demand worship like Kira.
He intentionally transformed himself into the most despised tyrant in human history.
He concentrated all the world's hatred, malice, and systemic inequality onto his own shoulders.
He united the globe in their absolute terror of him.
And then he orchestrated his own public assassination.
He let his best friend Suzaku, wearing the mask of Zero, run a sword through his chest.
He bought the world a chance at peace with his own blood. I fundamentally reject his methods. The philosophy of consequentialism, the idea that the ends justified the means, is a slippery slope that inevitably leads to the mass graves Lelouch filled.
But as I sat across from him, I could not deny the agonizing nobility of his final act.
He recognized that a man who builds a utopia on a foundation of corpses has no right to live in it.
Part Roman 3. The duality of absolute power, a comparative analysis. When categorizing these two anomalies, one must look at how they approach the fundamental concept of human free will. Light Yagami despises free will because it is inefficient.
He believes that humanity is inherently lazy, selfish, and prone to violence, and therefore must be managed like livestock. He views fear as the ultimate, perfect tool of governance. In his new world, nobody chooses to be good. They are simply too terrified of an invisible sniper to act on their darkest impulses.
He equates compliance with morality.
Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia violated free will, but he did so because he believed the existing structures of power had already stolen it.
The Britannian Empire gave the weak no choice.
His father, Charles, sought to use the sword of Akasha to freeze time itself, eradicating the concept of the future to prevent human suffering. Lelouch rejected this entirely.
He killed his own father because he believed that humanity, no matter how much it hurts, must be allowed to march toward tomorrow.
Lelouch usurped free will temporarily to destroy the systems of oppression, and then he died to give that free will back to the world.
Compare their reactions to the investigators who hunted them. When L challenged Light, Light engaged in a petty, lethal game of intellectual cat and mouse, ultimately sacrificing innocent lives and his own family's safety to prove he was the smartest man in the room.
When the Black Knights betrayed Lelouch, realizing the terrifying extent of his
Geese, Lelouch did not slaughter them.
He lied to them. He claimed he had been using them all along, intentionally burning his bridges so they would not be implicated in his crimes.
He protected them by making them hate him. Compare their ultimate fates.
Light Yagami died, or in our current reality, was apprehended screaming for his Shinigami to save him, demanding that the world acknowledge his godhood.
He died a coward, terrified of his own irrelevance.
Lelouch died, smiling, impaled on a sword, whispering that he had destroyed the world and created it anew.
Even now, resurrected by the immortal code, as LLE refuses to take the throne again.
He wanders the shadows, hunting down rogue Geese fragments, acting
as a silent guardian, cleaning up the remnants of the supernatural nightmare he helped unleash.
Light views himself as the protagonist of reality, owed absolute reverence.
Lelouch views himself as a necessary evil, a demon who belongs in hell for the things he has done.
It is this fundamental difference in self-perception that forms the bedrock of my final judgment.
Part Roman 4. The verdict on redemption. What does it mean to be redeemed? In my years as Superman, I have learned that redemption is not a transaction.
You cannot balance a cosmic ledger of good and evil.
You cannot unkill the people you have murdered.
Redemption is a grueling, agonizing, and unending internal process.
It requires 3 absolute pillars: empathy, humility, and remorse.
You must possess the empathy to truly comprehend the pain you have caused others, feeling it as deeply as if it were your own.
You must possess the humility to strip away your ego, admit that your actions were definitively wrong, and accept that you are entirely to blame. And you must possess the remorse to carry the guilt not as a badge of honor, but as a solemn, heavy vow to never let it happen again, dedicating the rest of your life to the service of those you have wronged.
Subject: Light Yagami. Kira verdict: beyond help.
Light Yagami is a psychological void. He is entirely incapable of fulfilling even a single pillar of redemption.
He lacks empathy on a biological level.
He is a malignant narcissist who views human beings as objects, as props on a stage designed to showcase his brilliance. He cannot feel the pain of a grieving mother or a terrified victim because to him they are not real. Only Kira is real. He lacks humility.
He is psychologically incapable of admitting fault.
If the world rejects his brand of justice, he believes the world is defective, not him. He views his apprehension not as a moral failing on his part, but as a failure of his subordinates or an unfair trick played by his enemies.
He lacks remorse.
He has never shed a single tear for the innocent people he slaughtered.
He only weeps for himself for the loss of his power and his throne.
To attempt to rehabilitate Light Yagami is a fool's errand. If placed in therapy, he would simply manipulate the clinicians.
If shown kindness, he would view it as a weakness to be exploited.
He will spend the rest of his life in a secure containment facility under the watchful eye of the Justice League. He will live a long, comfortable, and utterly powerless life.
I will not execute him, I will not give him the martyrdom he so desperately craves, but I will never ever let him touch the outside world again.
He is beyond the light.
Subject: Lelach Roman 6 Britannia 0 verdict: capable of redemption, a path already walked.
Lelach Roman 6 Britannia is a mass murderer.
He is a manipulator, a tyrant, and a man whose hands are stained with the blood of millions. The law of man dictates he should be locked away forever.
But the law of the soul is more complex.
Lelach meets all the criteria for redemption.
His empathy is precisely what drove him to madness. He loved his sister and his friends so fiercely that he was willing to burn the world to keep them safe.
His humility is absolute. He harbors no illusions about his own morality, referring to himself as a monster who has no right to happiness.
And his remorse is a crushing, infinite weight.
He carries the ghosts of Euphemia Shirley and the millions of soldiers who died for his cause every single day.
More importantly, Lelach does not need me to tell him to seek redemption.
He already sought it on the blade of Shizaku's sword. The Zero Requiem was an act of profound, terrifying self-sacrifice.
And now, as an immortal wanderer, he continues to pay his penance.
He uses his intellect not to rule, but to protect.
I will not lock Lelach away.
I agree with Bruce's assessment. As long as he remains in the shadows fighting the supernatural anomalies that threaten the fragile peace of the world, he serves a purpose.
He's a shepherd who has learned the terrifying cost of using the wolf's teeth. I do not forgive him. The dead do not forgive. But I recognize that a man who is willing to condemn himself to hell so that others may live in the light is a man who still possesses a soul. He is worthy of the chance to carry on, to suffer, and to slowly, agonizingly balance the scales in the dark.
Conclusion: the thunderstorm of absolute power does not corrupt inherently. It merely strips away the polite fictions we tell about ourselves, revealing the true architecture of the soul beneath.
Light Yagami was given godhood and revealed himself to be a hollow, frightened child who needed to terrify the world to feel significant.
Lelach Roman 6 Britannia was given godhood and revealed himself to be a tragic, broken brother who chose to be crushed by the weight of the world, so others could stand tall.
Humanity does not need gods.
We do not need invisible snipers or demonic emperors dictating our morality from on high. We need the freedom to stumble, the freedom to fall, and the profound, beautiful freedom to reach out and help each other back up.
The path to tomorrow is built on the choices of ordinary people. And as long as there is breath in my lungs, I will protect their right to make those choices free from the shadows of those who would claim the sky for themselves.
End of draft.
Save to encrypted archive.
Log out C. Can.
The Promethean glass containment sphere suspended within the lower levels of the Justice League Watchtower was a marvel of extraterrestrial engineering and human paranoia. It was partitioned exactly down the center by a barrier of pure, localized energy, a force field vibrating at a frequency that nullified sound, physical matter, and telepathic intrusion, yet could be modified to allow auditory exchange. On one side of the barrier sat Light Yagami. He wore the immaculate, sterile white uniform provided by his captors. His posture was rigid, a coil of kinetic anxiety and hyper-analytical processing. His brown eyes darted across every millimeter of the cell, mapping the structural integrity of the glass, the positioning of the automated defense turrets, and the vast, dizzying expanse of the Earth rotating silently thousands of miles below.
He had no notebook, no pen, and no shinigami.
For the first time in 6 years, he was entirely mortal.
On the other side of the barrier sat Lelach Roman 6 Britannia. He too wore the sterile containment uniform, yet he wore it as though it were the ermine-lined cloak of an emperor. He sat in his moulded chair with an aristocrat's relaxed grace, his legs crossed, his chin resting lightly on his knuckles.
His amethyst eyes were not frantically searching for an escape. They were fixed with cold, terrifying intensity upon the young man across the energy partition.
The audio filters chimed, signaling that the barrier between them had been made acoustically permeable. They were permitted to speak.
The gods of the watchtower above them were listening.
You're evaluating the tensile strength of the Promethean glass based on the refractive index of the starlight. Lelouch spoke first, his baritone voice smooth, cultured, and dripping with an aristocratic boredom that instantly grated against Light's ego. You are wasting your cognitive resources.
The alien Kal-El can survive a supernova.
If a cell was designed to hold entities of his caliber, your unenhanced human physiology will not breach it.
Sit down.
You are projecting weakness.
Light stopped his pacing.
He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing into predatory slits.
He had spent the last hour trying to deduce the identity of his cellmate. The boy was young, roughly his own age, possessing an aura of command that suggested immense systemic authority.
I am not projecting weakness, Light replied, his voice a perfectly modulated mask of calm superiority.
I am assessing the variables of my environment,
a necessary step for anyone who intends to reclaim their rightful place.
But you sit there with the fatalistic resignation of a defeated pawn.
Tell me who you to lecture the god of the new world on weakness.
Lelouch let out a soft melodic chuckle that echoed off the glass walls.
The god of the new world.
A grand title for a serial killer hiding behind a desk.
I know exactly who you are, Light Yagami.
The Batman provided me with a rather comprehensive dossier of my fellow inmates prior to our internment here.
Yakira, the invisible assassin.
The boy who found a supernatural notebook and decided that the cure for human nature was a planetary hostage crisis. Light's jaw tightened.
His true name, spoken so casually in this alien environment, was a psychological strike. I cured the disease that the pathetic justice systems of Earth were too cowardly to treat.
I reduced global crime by over 70%.
I ended wars.
I forced dictators to disarm.
I achieved absolute quantifiable peace.
You sit there and judge me, yet you radiate the same stench of mass murder that I have spent my life eradicating.
You are no saint.
I have never claimed to be a saint, Lelouch replied seamlessly, unfolding his arms and leaning forward, the dormant G-sigil hidden deep within his eyes.
I am a demon. I am a warlord, a traitor, a manipulator, and a tyrant.
I have the blood of millions staining my hands, and I will carry the weight of those souls until the end of time. The difference between us, Light, is not our body count. It is our capacity for self-awareness. I know what I am.
You're a monster who looks in the mirror and hallucinates a deity.
Light slammed his hands onto the small table in front of him, leaning toward the energy barrier. I am a deity. Godhood is not a matter of biological origin, it is a matter of function.
To be a god is to hold the ultimate authority over life and death, and to wield that authority to shape the moral arc of the universe. Humanity is inherently lazy, selfish, and violent. Left to their own devices, they will exploit the weak and destroy themselves. The strong prey on the weak, that is the only law of nature.
A philosophy you share with my late father, Charles I. Britannia, Lelouch interrupted, his voice dropping to a glacial, terrifying register. He too believed that the world was fundamentally broken.
He believed that the strong should subjugate the weak, that equality was an illusion designed by the feeble-minded.
And when he grew tired of the endless wars of humanity, he sought to use the sword of Akasha to destroy time itself.
He wanted to lock humanity in a perpetual, stagnant present.
A world without lies, without war, but fundamentally without a tomorrow. Lelouch stood up, walking slowly to the energy barrier, looking down at Light. Your new world is no different than my father's delusion, Lelouch continued, his voice vibrating with absolute conviction.
You did not teach humanity to be better, Light.
You did not cure their selfishness.
You merely paralyzed them.
You built a global panopticon where every human being lived in absolute, suffocating terror of an invisible sniper.
They did not choose to be peaceful. They were coerced into compliance under the threat of instantaneous cardiac arrest. A world where peace is maintained solely through fear is not a utopia.
It is a slaughterhouse waiting for the butcher to fall asleep.
And what is the alternative? Light shouted, the mask of the calm, calculating student finally slipping, revealing the manic corner megalomaniac beneath.
Look at the world outside this floating glass prison. Look at Gotham City.
Look at Arkham Asylum. The heroes of this universe catch the Joker, lock him in a padded cell, and a week later he escapes to murder 100 innocent people.
They refuse to cross the line because they are obsessed with their own moral purity.
Their refusal to kill the irredeemable is what keeps the cycle of violence spinning. I stopped the wheel. You didn't stop the wheel, you simply claimed a monopoly on it. Lelouch countered flawlessly, his intellect parrying Light's hysteria with surgical precision. You claim you only killed the irredeemable. You claim you acted as a harsh but necessary deterrent. But the historical record contradicts your divine narrative.
Let us discuss Linnell.
Taylor.
Light flinched. The name struck him like a physical blow.
He was a condemned criminal, yes, Lelouch said, pacing with the grace of a stalking panther.
But he appeared on your television screen claiming to be a detective, and he called you evil. He posed no physical threat to you. He was not murdering innocents in the streets. Yet you executed him immediately.
Why?
Because the god of the New World possesses the fragile, easily bruised ego of a spoiled teenager.
He insulted you, and you threw a temper tantrum with a weapon of mass destruction.
It was a tactical necessity.
Light spat back,
his mind racing to construct defenses.
To build a new world, the architect must be absolute.
L challenged my authority.
If I allowed dissent, the fear that maintained the peace would shatter.
The execution of Taylor was a demonstration of absolute power to ensure compliance.
It was a demonstration of absolute cowardice, Lelouch corrected ruthlessly. And what of Ray Pember?
12 FBI agents doing their jobs investigating a suspect. What of Naomi Masura, a grieving woman seeking justice for the man she loved? Did they threaten your precious peace, Light? Or did they merely threaten your anonymity? You did not kill them for the sake of the world. You killed them to save your own skin.
You manipulated a weeping widow, learned her name, and sent her to hang herself in the dark, entirely alone.
You didn't do that out of divine necessity.
You did it because you enjoyed the intellectual superiority of watching her walk into your trap. Light's chest heaved.
His knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of his table.
His mind, accustomed to outmaneuvering the greatest detectives on Earth, found no purchase against the Demon Emperor.
Lelouch did not care about the legalities of murder. Lelouch was dissecting the hypocrisy of the motive.
You speak of hypocrisy, Light hissed, his eyes wide and bloodshot, desperate to turn the psychological tide. You lecture me on sacrifice. I know the broad strokes of your File Zero, the massacre at the Special Administrative Zone of Japan.
The blood of Princess Euphemia.
Hundreds of thousands of innocents slaughtered because you accidentally gave a command you couldn't retract.
You killed your own sister to fuel a political rebellion.
The air in Lelouch's half of the cell seemed to freeze. For a fraction of a second, the flawless aristocratic mask shattered, revealing a depth of agony and self-loathing so profound it seemed to darken the ambient light. But the Emperor instantly rebuilt the walls, his eyes hardening into diamonds of pure resolve.
Yes, Lelouch said, his voice dropping to a terrifying absolute calm.
I killed Euphemia.
I murdered the girl I loved more than almost anything in this world. It was the greatest failure of my life, a sin that will burn my soul for eternity. But I did not hide behind the illusion of godhood to excuse it.
I did not claim it was part of a divine plan.
I recognized my atrocity, and I bore the weight of it.
I weaponized my own donation to forge the Black Knights to destroy Britannia and to tear down the system that necessitated such horrors.
Lelouch stepped right up to the energy barrier.
He looked down at Light, his presence radiating an overwhelming, crushing gravity.
And when my war was won, Lelouch continued, his voice echoing with the finality of an executioner's bell, when I had usurped my father, conquered the United Federation of Nations, and claimed absolute dominion over the earth, I did not declare myself a god.
I initiated the Zero Requiem. Light stared at him, his analytical mind trying to process the concept. The Zero Requiem, you intentionally became a tyrant. You drew the world's hatred. I became the singular focal point for all the malice, all the hatred, and all the vengeance of a bleeding world. Lelouch confirmed.
I united humanity not through shared ideology, but through shared, desperate desire to see me dead.
And when the hatred reached its zenith, I ordered my best friend, disguised as the hero I had created, to run a sword through my heart on live television.
I bought tomorrow with my own blood.
I died so the world could live.
Light's eyes widened.
For a moment, genuine, unadulterated incomprehension crossed his face.
The concept of ultimate altruistic suicide was a mathematical impossibility in the algorithm of Light Yagami's mind.
You threw it all away, Light whispered, his voice trembling not with fear, but with utter disgust.
You held absolute power.
You could have shaped humanity for generations. You could have ruled as a philosopher king. But you let them kill you. You sacrificed yourself for the masses. That is not nobility.
That is suicide.
It is pathetic. The masses are sheep.
They need a shepherd to guide them. If the shepherd dies to appease the flock, the wolves will simply return the next day. If you believe the masses are sheep, then you have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the human spirit, Lelouch said, a profound sorrow entering his gaze, as he looked at the boy across from him.
Yes, the wolves will return. Dictators will rise again.
Crime will resurface. The peace I bought is not eternal, it is a foundation. But because I died, I gave them the most precious thing in the universe, the freedom to choose to be better. The freedom to build a future based on their own volition, rather than cowering under the boots of a tyrant. Lelouch pointed a finger at Light. You are terrified of death, Light. You are terrified of irrelevance. You clung to your notebook because it was the only thing that made you special.
Without it, you are just a fragile, arrogant child who cannot tolerate a world he does not perfectly control.
You wanted a throne, but you refused to pay the price for it.
A true king leads from the front.
A true king takes the sins of his people upon himself.
You struck from the shadows, hiding behind a shiny garmy and a piece of paper demanding worship you never earned.
I earned IT.
Light screamed, finally shattering, slamming his fists into the energy barrier, the force field rippling with blue lights upon impact.
I am the protagonist of this world. I am Kira.
I gave them light.
I gave them order.
I was the only one willing to do what had to be done.
You're a fool.
A dead fool who threw away godhood for a flock of ungrateful sheep. Lelouch did not flinch as Light beat his fist blooded against the energy field.
He simply watched, his expression one of absolute chilling pity.
Look at yourself, Lelouch said softly, his words cutting through Light's hysterical screams like a scalpel.
You sit in a cage in the sky, stripped of your toy, begging an empty room to acknowledge your divinity. You are not a god like Yagami. You're a void.
A black hole of ego that consumed everything around you and produced nothing but corpses.
Lelouch turned his back on Light, walking toward the rear of his cell, returning to his molded chair.
He sat down, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes, dismissing Light from his reality entirely. Scream all you want, Kira, Lelouch murmured, his voice fading into the silence.
The world has already forgotten you.
Light Yagami fell to his knees before the barrier.
He clutched his head, tearing at his hair, his mind fracturing under the absolute, undeniable reality of his own pathetic nature.
He screamed his own name, he screamed for Ryok, he screamed for justice, but the sound was swallowed by the cold, infinite vacuum of space outside the Promethean glass. The monitor room, Justice League Watchtower, the massive holographic screens in the Watchtower's primary observation deck bathed the room in a cold, blue luminescence.
Standing in a semicircle around the feeds were the core members of the Justice League, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, and the Flash. For a long, heavy moment after Light Yagami collapsed to the floor of his cell, none of the planetary protectors spoke.
The sheer density of the ideological war they had just witnessed left a lingering, suffocating pressure in the air. Batman was the first to break the silence. His fingers flew across a holographic terminal compiling biometric data, vocal stress analysis, and psychological profiles into the Bat computer's remote servers.
My initial assessment stands, but requires severe escalation parameters, Batman grunted, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that resonated with absolute authority.
Light Yagami is a textbook malignant narcissist.
His methodology is cowardice weaponized by a supernatural anomaly.
He is incapable of empathy, incapable of remorse, and psychologically dependent on external validation.
He is, practically speaking, unredeemable. A permanent fixture in solitary confinement.
Batman paused, his white lenses narrowing as he focused on the feed of Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia, who sat in perfect, meditative stillness. But the other one, Batman continued, his tone laced with a rare, grim respect.
Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia is the most dangerous tactical anomaly I have ever profiled. He possesses a Class 12 intellect rivaling Lex Luthor, but he is completely unburdened by Luthor's ego. Luthor wants to rule the world to prove he is better than Superman. Lelouch conquered the world specifically to destroy himself. He is a consequentialist taken to the absolute apocalyptic extreme. He is willing to commit any atrocity if the mathematical outcome yields a net positive for human survival. He's a warlord, Wonder Woman stated, her voice carrying the ancient, resonant authority of the Mazera.
She crossed her silver-braced arms, her eyes fixed on Lelouch.
I've fought tyrants for thousands of years, Bruce.
I know the stench of men who use power to feed their own vanity.
Light Yagami reeks of it.
He is a boy playing with a sword he cannot lift, crying when he cuts his own hand. Ares would have despised him. Diana uncrossed her arms and took a step closer to the monitor.
But Lelouch understands the true burden of the crown.
In ancient times, kings were often sacrificed to appease the gods when the land grew barren.
Lelouch recognized that the political landscape of his world was fundamentally poisoned.
He became the poison, drew it all into himself, and then cut out his own heart to cure the patient.
I abhor his methods.
The manipulation of free will, the slaughter of innocence, it violates everything the Amazons stand for. Yet I cannot deny the warrior's spirit in him. He walked into hell with his eyes open, knowing he would burn so that his sister could live in the light. He is a monster, yes, but he is a monster of profound, agonizing nobility.
Superman floated a few inches off the deck, his arms folded loosely, his expression one of deep paternal sorrow.
He looked at Light writhing on the floor, and then at Lelouch sitting in the silence. They both looked at a broken world and decided that they were the only ones who could fix it. Superman said, his Midwestern baritone heavy with grief. That is the trap of absolute power. When you can do anything, you begin to believe you must do everything.
Light fell into the trap because he lacked a moral foundation.
He had no love in his heart, only ego.
He viewed humanity as a spreadsheet.
Clark drifted down, his red boots touching the metal floor.
But Lelouch's tragedy breaks my heart.
He loved his sister so much. He loved his friends.
And he let that love twist him into a tyrant because he couldn't trust humanity to find its own way out of the dark.
He believed he had to force them into a corner and traumatize them into peace. It worked structurally, but look at the cost. He died hated by everyone he fought to protect. He proved that humanity can survive, but he forgot that survival isn't enough. We have to choose to be good. A forced peace isn't peace at all.
I felt it. Jaeons, the Martian Manhunter, interjected, his deep resonant voice echoing in their minds as much as in the room.
He stepped forward from the shadows, his red eyes glowing faintly.
The energy barrier blocks direct telepathic intrusion, but the ambient emotional resonance leaking from that cell is staggering.
Jaeon looked at the screen displaying light. The boy named Light's mind is a sensory deprivation tank. There is no warmth. There is no genuine connection to another living soul.
It is a vacuum of endless screaming hunger.
He does not want to rule the world because he loves it. He wants to rule it because he hates it for not worshipping him. Jaeon then shifted his gaze to Lelouch.
But the Emperor's mind is a burning star collapsing under its own gravitational weight.
The guilt he carries is so dense, so absolute, it would shatter the psyche of an ordinary man in seconds.
He feels the agonizing death of every soldier, every civilian, every friend he manipulated. He has locked those screens in a vault within his mind, and he uses the pain as fuel.
He does not believe he deserves to exist.
He is functionally immortal, yet he is executing a perpetual psychological suicide. He is the most profoundly lonely creature I have ever sensed. Barry Allen, the Flash, had been vibrating slightly in place, running his hands over his face, clearly disturbed by the entire ordeal. He finally stopped moving and looked at the Trinity. "You guys are talking about them like they're figures in a history book," Barry said, his voice tight, lacking its usual optimistic cadence. "I hate the philosophy.
I get the psychological profiles, but guys, we're talking about millions of dead people.
Light murdered hundreds of thousands of people in cold blood while sitting in his pajamas.
Lelouch wiped out entire city blocks, manipulated armies, and used weapons of mass destruction.
I don't care if Lelouch felt bad about it afterward. I don't care if he let his friend stab him.
Dead is dead.
You can't math your way out of a massacre." Barry pointed at Lelouch on the screen.
He took away their free will. He looked them in the eye and turned them into biological robots. That's not a sacrifice. That's the ultimate violation. I run fast enough to see the space between seconds, and in every one of those seconds people have the right to make a choice. Even if it's the wrong choice. If we start saying, well, his intentions were good, and his structural outcome was positive, then what stops us from doing the same thing? What stops Superman from lobotomizing Arkham?
What stops me from vibrating through the brains of every dictator on Earth before breakfast?
"Nothing," Batman answered, his voice cutting through the room with absolute finality.
Batman turned away from the monitors facing the League.
"Nothing stops us but the line we draw in the sand," Batman continued.
That is why they are in that cell. Light Yagami represents what happens when power is given to a man with no empathy. Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia represents the far more terrifying reality of what happens when power is given to a man who has empathy, but abandons his morality to serve it. Lelouch proves that the road to hell isn't just paved with good intentions, it is paved with brilliant logic, supreme sacrifice, and necessary evils.
Batman walked toward the exit of the monitor room, his cape billowing behind him.
"We study them not to excuse them, Barry," Batman said over his shoulder. "We study them to remind ourselves why we must never, under any circumstances, cross that line. Because the moment we decide we know better than humanity, the moment we decide the ends justify the means, we don't become gods.
We just become wardens in a prison of our own making."
The heavy blast doors hissed shut behind the dark night, leaving the rest of the Justice League in the blue glow of the monitors, watching the two fallen gods of broken worlds sitting in the absolute silence of their eternal cage. Epilogue: the cold starlight piercing the watchtower's promethium glass remains detached from the fates of those within. Below, the sun rises and sets over billions of souls, oblivious to the cataclysmic forces recently diverted from their existence. Human history continues its march, imperfect and chaotic as it was destined to do. Within the containment block's silence, the contrast between the two prisoners reveals a final truth: absolute power only strips away human identity to expose the soul beneath. For a narcissist like Light Yagami, the end is the horror of absolute, forgotten irrelevance. Conversely, Lelouch Roman 6 Britannia remains in the darkness, carrying the eternal weight of his decisions, a tragic testament that noble intent cannot justify engineered tyranny. The Watchtower cells stand as a silent vigil as the Justice League watches the spinning blue world. Humanity's salvation cannot be found in a supernatural pen, a cosmic decree, or a loaded gun. Authentic peace is not something built for them, it must be constructed by them through agonizing, messy choices.
The heroes stay in the light, serving not as wardens or rulers, but as guardians of a fragile and beautiful freedom.